Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Terrestrial Material, where we talk about the material us terrestrials are interested in. This is a very, very special episode tonight. This is episode 16. We're going to call it the Consciousness Connection, and we're going to talk to Grant Cameron tonight. We've been obviously very, very long time fans of him. As you know, 14 appearances on Coast to Coast AM since 2003, 15 books he's either authored or co-authored. Grant is the recipient of the Leeds Conference International Researcher of the Year and the UFO Congress Researcher of the Year. He's been featured on Fox News, countless radio programs and lectures breaking down his research and thoughts on the topic of UFOs, consciousness, and the U.S. presidential involvement in such matters. Grant is approaching 50 years, everyone, of research in ufology. We are extremely grateful for his time today, without a doubt, and we definitely don't want to leave him waiting. So we'll get over to our grateful co-host, Steve French, and of course, Grant Cameron. Grant, how you doing tonight? So good to see you.
Thank you, Matthew. I feel famous now. That's a wonderful introduction, and welcome to you. And Stephen, thank you for your interest in what I do. We're at sort of the pinnacle of the fact that this thing may all be unraveling shortly, and we are the ones we've been waiting for, as some people say.
Yeah, without a doubt. I mean, hey, I'm starstruck, so.
Right. I mean, I'm glad there's actually some. I've had a lot of podcasts recently where a lot of young people. We used to have a joke, and I remember we had a conference in New Jersey where one woman asked the guy, this is a few years back, said, "Do you have a discount for seniors?" And he said, "Well, no, if we had a discount for seniors, everybody'd get a discount. No, we don't have a discount for seniors." And since 2017, a lot of young people have come in, which maybe is a good sign in terms of the fact that this thing's ready to move on. And as Max Planck said, science, and I would add ufology, move one funeral at a time. The old people will move out of the way, and the young people will take this thing home.
Yeah, as long as we're going in the right direction, you know what I mean?
Right. I think we're moving there.
Yeah, I sure hope so. I mean, I know you just had, and I listened to it, you and Stephen Bassett just had a really interesting conversation about Schumer rounds and of course, Burchett's amendment. How did you find that conversation? I mean, what did you really take from what Stephen was telling you about it?
Well, Steve and I go back quite a few years. I mean, I've known Steve a long time. We actually were going to co-author a book together. And I pulled out at the end because he wanted to say that Obama was going to declassify everything in the first 100 days. And I said, no, I'm not in a book that says that. No, I don't. But now it's like I said to him in the thing, I said, you've been working on this since 1995, and they should build you a statue. Even I laughed at him for many years. It's like, oh, Steve's still on this disclosure nonsense, you know. And now he turns out that he's going to be right. I'm not sure it's going to be the disclosure people want. I sort of differ with people as to what I think is going on. People I think are still, even last night I was thinking a lot of people taking stupid pills, that they have some crazy ideas about what's going on, and they're just sort of following the sort of the headlines, and the headlines will usually be negative or dramatic, and trying to get hits and stuff like that. And I think there's going to be a lot more consciousness, a lot of stuff that people probably are going to be fighting against, because you have the Schumer, but I think the more important event that's happened in the last month would be the interview that James Lukatsky did with Jeremy Corbell. And George Knapp. That was the most important interview I've ever heard in 20 years. It was like, because he basically confirmed everything I've been saying for years. And the key one that he said is the UAP phenomena. We've discovered that it is a combination of physical and psychic phenomena. That's how it works. And the last book I wrote was the UFO Sky Pilots. And that's what I say in the book. That's how you move the craft around. You move it around with your mind. And so this is what's coming. And a lot of people think it's going to be ET. I keep maintaining, no, I don't think it's going to be ET. I think you're going to be kind of surprised as what's going on here. And I think it's going to go right to the bottom line of what is reality. Is there as John Wheeler used to say, the quantum physicist, there's no out there. I mean, if that's true, I mean, it's like the idea that we think there's a big bang and there was a singularity and all this matter came out of nothing. And I think it's more probable that the singularity was a consciousness singularity, and there is no time and there is no space, and it's all here and now, as the beings told me from Great Britain when I interviewed them. I said, "Are you extraterrestrial?" And they said, "Would you like us to be extraterrestrial?" You can do that if you want, but no, we're not extra. They said, "We could even take you to our planet if you want, but no, we're not extraterrestrials. we've always been here, you're the visitor. And that's this idea about what's really going on. But the problem that we have is it's so news driven and Twitter driven that I made a posting about the fact that a 2-year-old child has an attention span between 4 and 6 minutes, and the attention span of somebody on the internet, you can look it up, is 8.25 seconds. And so people are just clipping through stuff, and nobody's really thinking what's actually going on. In
Well,
fact,
is that really where I want, if don't mind if I jump in, but like, what is your take, I guess, then on all of social media at this point? I mean, how does social media affected ufology? I mean, 50 years you've been seeing everything with this. Where do you see it's went through with kind of
it's absolutely changed everything, because everything is instantaneous. It's just that it's at a sort of a low sort of level that nobody's really doing any deep thinking. Everybody's just jumping on the bandwagon. We're going to get disclosure, and we're going to, the ETs, and we're going to get this technology. We're going to run around with it and stuff like that. And I don't know if you've seen I put a lot of Twitter posts in the last couple of days, and I'm asking these questions that I'm saying, hey, like, how did Lockheed Skunk Works get the crafts? Like, I mean, nobody's talking about this. And I said, like, and one of the things Lakatsky said is, and he said, I've got permission from the government to tell you that we have a craft and we actually got entry into the craft. And it's like, everybody says, that's fantastic. And wow, there's a craft and UFOs are real and stuff. And it's like, nobody's asking the question, like, where did the craft come from? Like I said, that, in my Twitter post this morning, I said, like, I mean, what's the deal here? There's like, they came across 1,000 light years and then they forgot where they parked the UFO. Like, this is crazy. And nobody's thinking about like they're complaining about, it's Lockheed Skunk Works and they're these bad guys. And, Danny Sheen is talking about, he's holding back on throwing these guys in jail. And I said, if you go back to the history of this thing, it was Lockheed Skunk Works that started this whole thing with Tom DeLonge in 2015 when they invited him to a barbecue to introduce the head of Lockheed Skunk Works.
Oh, so you think that was Lockheed he went to? Okay.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, he was at Lockheed Skunk Works, and he had a meeting. He said, if I do the introduction of the chairman, who was Robert Weiss, he said, I'll do it if I can get 5 minutes with the guy. And then he gets 5 minutes with the guy and he makes his pitch and stuff like that. And then the guy invites him to the skiff. Now, there's indications the skiff may actually been on Area 51, that Tom DeLonge went on Area 51. And you go, like, what the heck's going on? I mean, they're not telling the president, supposedly. They're not telling anybody. And they're taking Tom DeLonge into a skiff. And that's when he basically makes his pitch. You guys can't get the story out. It's social media. I've got all these followers and you need me and stuff. And then the one guy says, yeah, this might actually work. And that's when they send him to this intelligence guy at Pentagon City, which is where Lou Elizondo's first meeting took place, outside of Washington. And the guy says, things like this do not happen in the White House. They do not happen on Capitol Hill. They happen when people like this decide to take the football and move it down the field. And that was it. So they led him through this stuff. So Lockheed Skunk Works is actually the people who are behind this disclosure, and everybody's got them painted as the bad guys. And that's where I make these posts where I try to get people, and a lot of people pick it up, because the one had over, like, I think 109 comments. And it was, this basically like, how did Lockheed? Because I posted the actual document from the 1960s. I don't know if you followed all the ancient UFO stuff, but
some of it, yeah.
The big story used to be the whole story about moon dust, about the moon dust product when some of these documents leaked out. And this was the whole idea that any kind of Soviet rocket stuff and anything that fell on American territory was the eminent domain was given to NASA. And this is the whole deal is this was the moon dust stuff that they had, what have they got? Have they got UFO stuff, or is it just a Russian rocket nose cones and stuff like that? And so the eminent domain was there, and it's like, how did this thing change? So nobody's asking these sort of deeper questions, like, how did Lockheed get this stuff? Because people are saying, oh, there's a deep, dark cabal and they're running this stuff. And I said, no, somebody gave them the craft, and it was the government that gave them the craft. So what did the government say? The government says, oh, we need you to work on this craft. And so they go and they invest their money and they work on the craft. And somebody made up the rules and the regulations, the laws, or people will complain about, they'll say, oh, the president isn't being briefed. And I said, come on, give your head a shake. I mean, if you're the president, you got to realize the president has primary authority on classification. That's Trump's big argument in court now. And this is this idea that you can declassify anything you want. And if you're there and they say, oh, you can't be briefed in this, you basically slam your fist down on the desk and you say, I need you to put the security over at Lockheed Skunk Works. They got 15 minutes to leave the building. They've lost their security clearance, because people do not realize that the president is the guy who hands out the security clearances. So the president is handing out the security clearance to the contractor, and then people are turning around saying, well, the contractor's not telling the president. And it's like, no, that's not what's happening. People are missing.
Yeah. I was gonna say I really liked your opinion on that, where you said a big reason why presidents, current ones that are in position, won't speak about it is, I think you mentioned the tar baby, right? Where they touch it, they can't get their hands off it, they have to keep talking about it, and then what happens if they have to play dumb, but they don't want to look dumb because of the president, right?
Yeah, but that's changed though. That's the question I asked Steve Bassett. I said, Steve, why is the White House not stepping up on this thing? I mean, the radioactive issue is gone, and this is going to be like the big. That's what David Grush talked about. He hinted that this is going to be an election issue. So why don't they just sort of leak it out that Biden has approved the process that's going on? I said, the big fear to me would be that Trump stands up and says, "Oh, I'm going to disclose," and then he owns the issue. And they say, "Oh, so if you can disclose," and then well, Trump said, "Well, I'm the guy behind it." And you grab the issue now because this is a hot issue, and you can see before. I mean, you'd post something and you'd get a little bit. Now you take a look at this Chris Sharp from the newspaper in the United States.
I've heard of him. Yeah, I've heard of him.
Yeah, he wrote that article about the fact that these 4 Republicans that stood up to block the Schumer amendment,
right?
And it had almost 1 million reads. I mean, it's a different story. It's a hot item. And,
it's big, Grant. But I mean, I still think that there's a layer of stigma that's there, even with the mainstream population. I mean, I still don't think we're completely out in the open, right?
Well, may not, but if Biden signs, that's what I said to Steve. I said, Steve, I mean, if Biden signs on the 21st, this national disclosure, this National Defense Authorization Act, there's going to be 40 reporters there, and he's going to have his 10 pens, and he writes a little bit with the 10 pens.
Right.
That's all they're going to want to know about is the UFO thing.
That makes sense.
This thing. And that's where it changes. That if Biden says, because that's what happened in 2017, that's when all the young people started to flood into the UFO field. It was really toxic before 2017. But when the gray lady stood up, the New York Times stood up and said, yeah, the government is investigating UFOs, everybody went, really? It's like, and all the stigma went away. And if the president stands up, because he's actually made a statement already, there was this national security advisor came out, and he was asked, is the president in favor of this? And he said, well, if the president is in favor of it, yes, that's why he allowed this thing to get set up, the Arrow program to get set up in the Pentagon. The president is behind it. And then, so, the roof didn't cave in, the same as the New York Times. I wrote an article in 2009 called The 64 Reasons They've Decided Not to Tell You the Truth.
Yeah, right.
And it was Stephen Greer was big back then. And the idea was, well, the stock market's going to melt down. Oil will be worth nothing. People are going to commit suicide and stuff like that. And what happened in 2017? Nothing, because there's been this acclimatization thing going on for many, many years, dropping stuff. And I maintain, I wrote a number of books. I've got 2 more coming out right now about this idea that the government has been disclosing this for years. They've been gradually leaking stuff into the media. And so when something like the New York Times story happens, people will just go, yeah, okay, I know that already. Okay, now what is it? Where are they from? Where are the aliens from? And they just go to the next step. And that's what's going to happen. So if they say UFOs are real and we're studying this sort of stuff, people are just going to want to go to the next question. That's why they say you can have this thing where we're going to disclose and we're just going to say, okay, we're going to tell you this, but we're not going to give you classified material. Nobody's going to stop. It's just like one question leads to another question, which leads to another question.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's the part of this Schumer. That's the part of Schumer grant that I do like. I mean, there's things with the Schumer amendment that I'm not super happy with. But I am happy with it. They're asking for Title 50. They're looking at the DOE. I think that's a big difference from what Burchett's asking for. Just going in with the DOD. I feel like Arrow has already kind of done that. And I don't know. I personally think that the Pentagon is not really interested in telling us the truth. I mean, at the end of the day, I think they had a lot of opportunities to do that. I think when you put something in place where you can kind of hold their feet to the fire, I think that does make a difference. Because I think, when you look at it, all the amendments all cover national security, Grant. They can always shut it down at the very end and say, you know what? We're not going to tell you it's national security. However, the one part of I think that changes that is that if you can get the DOE into a position to where if a whistleblower grant was to come out, and say, hey, no, wait, these documents that we were supposed to give to the archivist, we were supposed to give to the review board, we're not going to give to them. They're here. Now people are in trouble. That's different. Where the DOE is
Yeah.
not in a position to where they can lie, they can say whatever they want. You know what I mean?
Well, the key thing that I guess it was Grush that brought it up, and this is the importance of the president of the United States. So what happens now is you have DOE, and you may be from defense intelligence. You go to DOE, the defense, the energy, and they just tell you like, get lost, get off the property. Like, and that's the thing, is everybody's at the same level, and nobody. That's why 9/11 happened, because nobody was sharing intelligence.
True.
Everybody was fighting with each other. And that's what Gresh said. If they can't get their, what together, then we need an executive, because the president is the top guy. He just says, you're to talk. And nobody you can't say no. The president is running the show. He's the chief of the head of state. So he's got to be involved in negotiations. He's the chief executive officer of the government. He's the commander in chief of the U.S. military, and he's the head of all the intelligence agencies. You're insubordinate if you tell the president no. So you need somebody above all these agencies to tell the agencies. Right now, they're all at the same level, and they're not cooperating. And they played even the game with the Schumer amendment. If you saw where they've changed the name to the anomalous. So it's now unidentified anomalous phenomenon. And the reason they did that was because the Air Force was playing the game. We don't have to give you anything from space, because aerial doesn't include space. And the Navy was saying, well, we're not going to give you anything from under the water because it's the aerial. It doesn't. And so they have to play these little word games. And that's why the Schumer Amendment has been so carefully written by Danny Sheehan, and I guess Grush was involved, and people like that. And they looked at every little thing to shut all the doors so that this thing has to come through. And you get Burchett, who's pretty clear-spoken guy. He said, I don't need a lawyer. Just put it down. Just put it out. I don't need a lawyer to write a big 64-page thing. But the Schumer thing is they've come up against all these objections in the past, and so they're basically shutting all the doors. And I guess the only objection, what I have is that they're going to stretch this thing over at least 6 years. They're going to do this gradual disclosure thing. And then Danny Sheehan basically says, if they kill the thing, then he's going to do the same thing he did with the Iran Contra. He's going to go to federal court, and he's going to get a subpoena power, and he's going to start dragging these people out. And there's going to be the uncontrolled disclosure where they're going to bring this thing out. It's coming out one way or the other. So it's exciting times. I think it definitely, you're going to see a lot of stuff even now. I mean, the amount of stuff that's happened just in the last month or two is just incredible. It's hard to keep up in terms of different things that are happening. So it'll keep going that way. I just think that it's going to be a lot less ET physical things than people think it is. I always, sort of joke with people, you may have to put on your suit and go back to Sunday school, because I mean, to me, this is definitely not ET. It's something much more complex. It's always been here. It's a higher vibrating level of consciousness, or whatever you want. And it's playing with us. That's the other question I always say to people. Like, people ask all these things like, oh, what's a new sighting? And I say, hey, even Danny Sheehan talked about, the thing drops down from 80,000 feet to sea level, and it was 5,000 Gs or whatever. And he's like, how do they do 5,000 Gs? And it's all this technology stuff. And it's like, the big question is, why is a UFO dropping from 80,000 feet down to sea level in 7/8 of a second? Why is it doing this? What did it suddenly realize it forgot the wife's dry cleaning and we got to get out of here? or why do people talk about, oh, the UFO it's a UFO because it did a 90-degree turn? And nobody asks the question like, why is it doing a 90-degree turn? Like, what is that about? Or if you take a look at the Skinwalker Ranch and I had this back in 1975 with a young kid. I remember him telling this story. He was 7 years old, and he was just petrified. He was hiding behind this chair, and I'm getting him to describe this sighting. He's outside. They have no toilet, so he's urinating off the deck of his house, and the parents aren't there. And he's there with his sisters inside, and he's got his horse, and this thing comes over top of the tree, and you can hear the branches breaking, and he's sort of freaking out. And then he tells this story about he wouldn't talk, and then I put the little diagrams of the UFOs on the ground, and I crawled in the middle of the room, and this kid crawled out from behind, and I said, what did it look like, Ronnie? And he went, that one there, and he pointed immediately, and I said, was it big? Big as a house, he said. And I said, did it move? Yeah, move, just go. went across the road. And that's what Brandon Fuel talks about. If you hear him talk about his first sighting, he talks about this like a little kid in awe. He said it was sitting there, and we're all watching this saucer sit right in the daylight. And it's like, well, what's the saucer doing? I ask people, like, when you saw the UFO, yeah, what was it doing? Wasn't doing anything. It was just there. And that's the thing. And nobody really thinks, what is the UFO actually doing? And that's what happened. And it moved. And when you hear Brandon tell the story, it was like he was here and all of a sudden it was here. And it moved from place to place. And he went, did you see that? And that's what they're doing. I call it the theory of wow. They want you to go, what the heck's going on? They do the 90-degree turns. They take off for Brandon Fugel. And people describe this, that it takes off like lightning going the other way. Like, why do they take off so fast? Because they want you to go, oh my God, did you see that? And then you tell the story and they retell the story, and everybody, and their consciousness rises and everybody says, something's going on here. There's somebody here. It's like something, you see that? This 5,000 G's and stuff. And it's really got nothing. They're just showing these weird things.
Well, that comes to my question for you, Grant. I mean, when you look at military lead time, I mean, the tic tac, I mean, do you think that's possibly, though, back engineered technology that Fravor witnessed something from Lockheed? Or do you think that actually was whatever the phenomenon, we were looking at?
Well, two things. Number one, you take a look at the Katsky. One of the key things that I always fought about, all aliens are different. Nobody has the two. If you start comparing Betty Hill's gray versus Whitley Strieber's gray versus Betty Andreasen's gray, they're not even close to looking the same.
It changes, yeah.
And what Lukatsky said is they got the 200,000 sightings that they had in OSAP on the databases, and no two sightings were the same. And then you start wondering, like, what's really going on? Is there actually the craft, the thing are morphing? People have always known this, the crafts morph. And they started as wooden ships in 1896 with, propellers and balloons on them and stuff like that. And they said, we're from Mars. And I say to people, if you believe this is ET, do you actually believe that a wooden ship came through the vacuum of space from Mars with these guys on it? I mean, come on, this is it. The phenomena is changing. And it's
interesting.
This sort of wow thing. And so Lukatsky, that was one of the key things that he mentioned, was the fact that every single craft is different. And when I looked at my Sky Pilot thing, I went back and looked, and sure enough, it's exactly the same thing. So the idea behind Sky Pilots, the 36 people who've flown the craft, is they all had the basic experience. They were on board a ship. There was somebody behind them talking. They were told to do whatever, put your hand on a panel, and the craft was alive. The craft was conscious. They became one with the craft, and whatever they thought is what the craft did. And they could go from here to the other side of the galaxy instantaneously. And the people would say, it's within you. Imagine it within yourself. And as soon as you can imagine it with yourself, push the button. The key is that no two people did the same thing. Chris Bledsoe put his hand on a beehive type thing in the middle of the ship. The U.S. Air Force retired colonel put his hands on a panel. My friend in Boulder, Colorado, told me she put her hand on a ball. Everybody put their hand on something different. Every story was the same. So Lukatsky points out the fact that they're all the same. And people say we got the technology. I remember back in 1975, I had my first sighting a couple weeks after the end of the Vietnam War. And people said, oh, it's just the Americans, because we were like 30 miles from North America. And I go, if that was American stuff that I saw, they should have done a little bit better.
I agree. Yeah, I agree with you. I agree with you 100%. I mean, I still think, Grant, that if anybody ever wanted to push me off the hill, that even if we have this technology ourselves and we've been working on it, it's all from somewhere else. Other scientists, physicists, Grant, other countries, they're smart too. They would have already created this stuff too. It's not like we were just lucky enough to have the same 4 physicists drinking coffee that figured this stuff out in the past and nobody else has. Yeah. I mean, that's my stance. I just wondering what you think about. So when you look at how people experiences have talked to you about how they fly the craft, they think, they move, does that technology just sound to you like we couldn't figure it out even if we had 1,000 years first? Is that where you're kind of
Eric Davis said that and I was dealing with NIDS back in 2000. I won't get into that whole story. What I was, they had a bunch of stuff they were interested in what I was doing. And I talked to Eric Davis, and he's famous for telling the story that in 1989, they put it on the shelf because they couldn't figure it out. And if you look at Lukatsky says the craft, he says the craft had no engine, had no fuel tank, it had no propulsion system, and they had nothing. And this is the basic thing. And Jani Sheehan points out the fact that you take a look at what's going on in Ukraine right now. We're doing trench warfare. This is World War One stuff. I mean, where's the secret technology that we're supposed to have? I mean, there's no way. Or if you listen to Jim Semivan, who got the briefing, and Jim Semivan says, "Oh, people say, oh, we just got to connect the dots." He says, "Not only do I not think we're going to do that, I'm not really sure there's any dots." And you start hearing these high-level guys talk about this, the fact that they haven't got a clue. Or Lukatsky, they're trying to get him to talk, and he said, I can't talk about that. You've got my statement that we've got a craft. I can't go beyond that, because he said, I'm an expert at taking highly classified material and putting it into lower classifications. And he said, what I have to do is whatever question you give me, I have to write it up, the answer, and I have to put it through this Dopser thing in the Pentagon. They approve it, and then I can talk about it. I can't. So they're trying to get them. What's inside the craft? What's inside the craft? And if you heard the Danny Sheehan story, and I've got stories from the Sky Pilots telling the same story, was you go inside the craft, it's 30 feet on the outside, and you go inside, it's the size of a football stadium inside. Yeah. The first woman that told me that she'd flown the craft, when I thought she was totally insane, she told me, and this is 2013, I'm looking back, I'm going, this may be true. She said they got crafts. They can make them as big as they want. They got crafts that are the size of a solar system. There's no way we got this. No
well, so when you look at Schumer and they start talking about eminent domain, I mean, is that, why do you think Lockheed, Northrop Grumman, these kind of companies, why are they so afraid then? Is it just if they're not able to figure any of it out, why are they afraid of giving it up if that were the case?
Well, I would say if I was Lockheed, I would say you gave it to me. We're working under government regulation. We didn't come and steal it from the government. The government gave it because the government did. The government, half of the U.S. government is contracted out. That includes food services for wars and stuff like that. Because it's simple in business. You don't want to deal with sick people, sick time people, and human resource issues. You just contract the whole thing out. So this is contracted out to people who could probably try to figure this thing out. And now they're getting thrown under the bus. This is like I make a joke. This is like this happened in. Watergate, it happened in Iran-Contra, and it happened in January 6th, where you have all these people that get hired, contractors, lawyers, advisors, and then they all go to jail, and the president walks away. It happens every time, and this is what's happening here. Is Lockheed gets brought in, they're told, help us figure out this problem. And now they're getting thrown under the bus as being the bad guys. And I'm saying, no, that's why I kept saying, like, how did Lockheed get the crafts? They got the crafts, and the president is in charge of security clearance. Someone gave them security clearance, and if they don't like it, they could pull the security clearance anytime they want.
That whole board is supposed to get every clearance possible. If that review board was to be put together from the Schumer
they would have
the
president. So the president doesn't. Like a lot of people say, the president doesn't get briefed. And I'm going, give your head a shake. The president doesn't even have a security clearance because he is the guy that's invented the system. The first security clearances were secret and confidential by Roosevelt in 1942 during the war. And then Eisenhower added top secret. And then they added the SCI stuff under Clinton and all these guys. And they just added on. The president is in charge of security. It is not done by law. It's done by executive order. All security clearances go through the executive office of the president of the United States. So the idea that somebody's not going to tell the president is absolute nonsense. The president doesn't have a security clearance. He can get whatever he wants. He can ask whatever he wants. Like they brought me in for their briefing on Trump. And this is a high-level, big donor for Trump out of Pennsylvania. And he said, "Oh, I want your hand." So I talking to him, and he said, "Well, they're not going to tell Trump. Where do you think the crafts are?" And I go, "Well, number one, I don't know where the crafts are, but what do you mean they're not going to tell Trump?" And he said, "Well, they're not going to tell him." I said, "What do you mean they're not going to tell him? Who's they?" And he said, "Well, CIA and stuff." And I said, "Well, he hires them, man. Everybody leaves. So you hire the CIA, you hire your buddy for the Defense Intelligence Agency, you hire all these people. And if they don't tell you, if your friends don't tell you, then whose problem is that?" And that's the whole thing. The president has this unlimited power. And that's the thing behind the Schumer amendment, is that the president is at the top. There's nobody can turn down and say, we're not going to talk or anything like that. The president basically gives an order. And if you don't you're going to lose your security clearance. You're going to get reprimanded for being insubordinate to the guy who has the most power in the world. So that to me is the key of the Schumer amendment, is the president is been brought into the loop. Before it was like, the Defense Intelligence Agency or the energy has it or whatever, but you can't get it out of them because there's nobody with any power to make them cough up their stuff.
Yeah, it's very interesting, Graham. I mean, they are leaving it down to the president. They are in that amendment.
I mean, that's one of the things I noted.
The president to run the show. I mean, because then everybody has to do what they're told to do. And once the president stands up and says this thing's for real, you think it's gone viral now. You wait. I mean, that's game over. If the
Yeah,
president
I
stands up,
agree with you. I agree with you. I think that mainstream, whether it's media or just mainstream population, though, Grant, I think that's what they're waiting for, though. I think people want to see clear evidence of some kind. But if you have a president come up and sign something and starts relaying a lot of this information, yeah, I agree with you. You know, doing the mummies in Mexico and stuff like that, people are going to write all that stuff off. Mostly, it's going to get laughed at, and you're not going to get anywhere. But when I agree with you, I think if the president were to stand up and say, "Hey, look, this is what's going on," I do think people would listen. I do think that they would look at this stuff differently for sure.
yeah, the same happened with the New York Times. Once the New York Times stood up and said this isn't for real, everybody went, New York Times said that, and the Washington Post said that, and that changed everything. Before then, it was a totally different world, and anybody that was in that pre-world will tell you that. I mean, you didn't talk about it, and newspapers wouldn't touch it. New York Times wouldn't touch it, and Washington Post, and then suddenly they're touching it, and it's like, wow. So yeah, different world, and I think everything's going to unravel, and then we'll see what happens with the consciousness thing, because that's what I think the intelligence is doing. It's
well, before we get on that, Grant, if I can jump in, what do you think about Elon Musk? I mean, do you think he has any reason to be briefed and tapped his shoulder at all? Do you think he's read in at all? What's your opinion on him?
No, I don't think so. I think he may have gotten some word from someone. No, he's just another business guy. If he has a need to know, I've never heard his name come up in connection to any of this. I don't think so. No, I mean, yeah, unless he had, like, if he, for example, if Trump was in, Trump might call him in and whisper some stuff in his ear or whatever. But no, I've never seen him as being part of this whole thing. He's still doing he's launching rockets, which the Chinese were doing 5,000 years ago. It's nothing new, and batteries are nothing new. We invented the battery just a couple of years after the 1896 UFO sightings. And the UFO sightings in 1896 were very important because they had lights on them, these giant lights, but there was no batteries. And so the question was, like, I mean, is that their technology? No, there's this phenomena is leading us down with breadcrumbs, one after another, and they're doing all these weird things, and they're probably laughing, and they're mutilating cattle, and then you find out that the cattle are all downwind and downstream for nuclear power activities, and then they're interfering with nuclear weapons. But people will do the fear thing. Oh, nuclear weapons, man! What they're doing, and that hasn't happened for 60 years. Cattle mutilations haven't happened for many years. Ground traces where they land and burn the grass, that hasn't happened for at least 25 years. And people have to realize, when you've been in as long as I do, there's these patterns that it does this, and then it stops, and it does this, and it changes, it does that, and it's doing this stuff, and everybody's going, wow, and they're watching all this stuff, and that's what they're doing. They're getting us to figure the thing out. It's like, if you've ever interviewed Mike Clelland, I always tell the famous story that he told, which is, again, one of the most important stories I've ever heard in my life. He talks about, he does the owl books. So he writes these 2 books on owls and the connection with UFOs and screen imaging and all this kind of stuff. And he's an experiencer. And he talks about, he's on the Utah. He's coming back from a UFO conference in Arizona, and he's coming through Utah, and he's an outdoors guy. So he just takes a sleeping bag and he goes in the middle of the desert, and he's lying in the middle of the desert, and he's sleeping. And he wakes up and he sees this looks like a UFO sitting on top of the mountain. And he goes, oh, it's like a UFO with the lights all around it. And why do UFOs have lights on them? They have lights on them so you can see them. They don't need lights on. So he has these lights around the craft, and he's
interesting, yeah.
UFO. And then he goes back to sleep again, and then suddenly he's out of his body, and he's floating above his body. He's above the craft, and suddenly he goes down into the craft, and they have these beings, and it's just bizarre the way they set up. They got carpet. He says it's like being in an cheap Indiana motel, and there's wooden card table type things, and these beings are behind. You can't see their faces, and they're behind. He's going, "What am I doing here? What are you bringing me here for?" And then they say the time is right, and he goes, "The time is now," and he goes, "Time is now. What do you mean?" And suddenly he realizes it comes into his mind. I volunteered for this. And he starts swearing, F this, F that. You never told me it was going to be this bad. You never told me it was going to be this depression and all this kind of stuff. And he gets really upset. And then they sort of calm him down. And then he's being regressed by Yvonne Smith out of LA. And he says to Yvonne, when I'm under, ask me about the owls. Ask why I'm so obsessed with owls. What's the connection to the owls? And so then as soon as he calms down, then she says, so Mike, what's with the owls? Like, why are you so obsessed with owls? And he starts channeling. He goes, the owls are not important. The owls don't mean anything. The owls are just a symbol. The owls are a symbol that you put on a door. It's the door that's important. When you go to the door and you see the owl on the door, you wonder what it's doing there. And then you say, hey, I wonder what's behind the door. And you open the door and you see this vast unexplored universe. And that's what they're doing. They're whether it's a UFO or an owl, they're moving us from one door to the next door to the next. And we open the door, we look, and we learn a little bit more. And that's what's happening. And so
So
that's the way I
that's
explain
how
people.
they're manipulating consciousness. You think the phenomenon
Yeah,
is doing that,
if,
like
if,
the like a human antenna? I know you've kind of spoke a little bit about that. If you wouldn't mind talking about that a little bit.
yeah, even Lukatsky says that they're and of course they do the negative military thing, that they're messing with people's minds, that they are manipulating how we see things. So that's the whole thing. They're moving our consciousness down the road, because the way we do it is we go into a country and we say we're here to bring you freedom, democracy, Jesus, and McDonald's, and the next thing you know they're pointing a gun and saying, "Get the hell out of here! Who do you think you are?" And
Yeah.
so they're not doing that. They're getting us to figure it out. So they're doing these weird things which don't make any sense, and you go like, what is that, and they're giving you experiences, which I've had experiences, and you can talk to people who've had experiences and they'll say always the same thing.
Well, you spoke to a lot. I mean, you spoke to a lot of people, no doubt about it. Yeah.
Yeah, and in different things. I wrote contact modalities. So I looked at psychedelics, which I did my own 27 session high dose sessions, and hypnosis and all these different things. And when you talk to people about having one of these experiences where they're either on board a ship or they have a near-death experience, because 37% of all experiencers have a near-death experience, and you see all these things and you say, well, they're all got to be connected. And when you talk to the people, they say it came with absolute certainty. That was what happened to me. My first experience, I went, it came with the hardest part of this experience to explain, I said, is that it came with absolute certainty. I knew this is how it worked. There was no question this is how it worked. And so you see them sort of dragging us along. The question is who they are. I think it's a higher I call it the intelligence. So I stay on that, and it's a higher vibrating intelligence that knows more than we do, and it's giving us these little hints. And that's the whole deal behind the thing about this craft comes, like what we got, like 6 crafts that have landed and they didn't pick them up, or they didn't recover the crash flying saucers. And so you come across the galaxy and then little tiny pieces start to fall off the flying saucer. Come on, give your head a shake. This doesn't make
Yeah,
any sense.
I mean, here's the thing, though. For me, Grant, though, I still think that there's possible that there's multiple, though. I still think there could be beings from somewhere else in the universe that could come here and maybe like an interaction with our atmosphere. I mean, all technology, even nowadays, our computers crash. I mean, it's in a different place. I mean, technology isn't really isn't unfallible. And I wonder, can you still have crashes like that? I mean, what do you think? Do you think that there could be multiple like we could have people coming from somewhere else and a kind of a psychic phenomena that's also going on?
No, I think it's all one thing. There is only one thing. If once you start talking about nouns, like people say, oh, it's multidimensional. There's saying, so people will go. The one guy said he was in the field or whatever, and he talking to a being. And he said, "What level am I on?" And the being goes, "What do you mean, what level you're on? There's no levels." And we do. It's like the ancient Chinese expression. The Tao that can be named is not the Tao. The eternal name is not the eternal name, or the name that can be named is not the eternal name. And this is the idea that once you call it a noun, once you change it from a verb to a noun, you're wrong. It's not anything. All the world's a stage. All the men and women and aliens are but actors. We're all etheric beings. All the world, I maintain, the world is made out of consciousness. Consciousness, as Max Planck says, is primary. You cannot go behind consciousness. So consciousness comes first, then comes matter. So the idea to me is there's a singularity of consciousness, and all the sparks of the divine move out, and we are the ones creating the universe. It is not God created the heavens and the earth, the material stuff, and put these spiritual beings inside the bodies. We are ones creating the world, and that's what this technology is starting to show us: is that you can take a ship, and like the guy said, my friend Ron Johnson, and you should interview him if you ever interview. But he's very very sick.
Sure.
But anyway, he said they asked him, like, so Ron, where would you like to go? And he said, I'd like to see the Milky Way from a distance. And he's sitting in a chair and he's holding his fingers in the chair. And they said, Ron, it's within you. Go within yourself when you can imagine it. It'll take about 1 second. He said there was intense G force. And he said he looked out the window and there was the Milky Way off in a distance. So that's like 100,000 light years in 1 second. So we're either going 100,000 light years or not going anywhere. I think there's a
Oh, oh, lost him. Oh,
remote viewing. So when somebody's going to do a remote viewing, they give you a target 67347, whatever, and you don't hear the remote viewer going, "Hang on, I'm flying there. I'll be there in a minute." He says, "I got it. I'm at the target." They're instantly at the target. And the idea that they are not going anywhere on remote viewing, they're going within your head. Everything's within your head. And that's what I found when I wrote Contact Modalities, is that I've had this experience 3 times, and 40% of all UFO experiencers say at one point during their experience they knew the answer to everything in the universe. 31% of near-death experiencers will say at one point during their experience they knew the answer to everything in the universe. I've had that experience 3 times. So the idea is everything is there. All the answers are there. It's the ability to shut down the left brain and get into the field, get the material and bring it back, as Tesla did. When Tesla invented the alternating current engine, he was walking in a park in Budapest and suddenly it popped into his head and he told the guy, "Oh," and he drew it in the sand. That's the whole deal, is that once you quiet the mind, you pop into the field, you get the material. Or Gary Nolan, famous in UFOs. He does the genetic stuff and on the experiencers and all that kind of stuff and the metal analysis. I asked him, I said, "I need a quote from you about because he's worked on this intuitive thing." He says his expression was, "I don't know how it works, but I know how to make it work."
So no simulation. So no simulation, Grant. You don't think simulation theory is something that like, have you looked into that at all?
That gets away. That makes it always, again, that there's somebody running the simulation, that there's somebody behind the simulation. It's all one thing. It's all the same thing. It's all, you can call it a simulation. It's all ooly stuff. It's all consciousness types.
Because when you say download, Grant, to me that sounds like process, computer. We download, and kind of the way you described it, the difference between like download and inspiration, where a download's instantaneous, right?
But the illusion is hard to break. So I get in the illusion too, that you have this idea that it's coming into your head, that I'm here and it's coming into your head. The way you got to look at it is, I always point out this out. If you have a near-death experience or you have an out-of-body experience, you float away from your body. You look, as Betty Andreasen, the experiencer, said when she came back into the room after she'd been with the beings for like hours and came back, and she said, "I was sitting on the side of the bed." And I'm going, "What?" And she got in her body and went back to sleep. And this is the thing. So if you float away from your body with a near-death experience, or you die, or you have an out-of-body experience, you look back at yourself. And with simulated universe, okay, you look back at yourself and you say, "Is the consciousness in my head?" No, it's not. My consciousness is right here. It's floating around the room. The body and the brain and the head is inside the consciousness. I'm looking at it. It's inside my consciousness. And you can float to the window as this consciousness and float to the window and look at the stars and the planets and stuff, and suddenly realize, like, oh, that's in my consciousness as well. And that's when you get this whole idea about non-locality, about the idea of the spooky action at a distance, that you can have one particle on one side of the universe, one particle on the other side of the universe. And if you change the spin of the one, the other one on the other side will instantaneously spin, which either means there's some bizarre thing going on faster than the speed of light, or there is no space. It's an illusion. There's a space. It's like a bell. You ring the bell and it rings the whole thing. And that's why we have the nuclear weapon issue, was that when we detonated the nuclear weapon, the whole universe knew, because it rang like a bell. The whole universe.
Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, they really started to care after that. I mean, no doubt about it. I mean, I only bring up simulation, Grant, because I haven't heard you really talk about some of stuff, and I just wanted to make sure we had some more relevant stuff.
It sort of gets people down. It is that idea, but it gets people down the idea that it's a computer and there's somebody. Everybody always say, "Who's running the simulation?" And it's like, we're running the simulation.
I get it. Yeah, I mean, I'm in the middle. I'm somebody who's looked at this stuff for years, but I still haven't formulated my whole opinion on what I think everything is. And so I talk to everybody that I can on all sides of this thing, because I really want to understand. I feel like if I get stuck down an echo chamber, Grant, I'll just never get to the truth. And
simulation theory is part of the revelation, that is a higher advanced idea. When you talk simulation, then people can sort of understand what you're talking about. If you don't use simulation, then they think you're absolutely insane.
Yeah.
True.
And the consciousness creates matter and stuff like that, and the particle comes into will not come into a physical being until it has an observer and all that kind of stuff, and people just, their heads sort of spin. But when you talk about simulation theory, then people sort of understand that it could be, or as I had the quote from John Wheeler, who came up with the idea of black holes, wormhole theory, information theory. The world is information theory and all that sort of stuff. And there's one quote which I was trying to track down where it says, "I'm 100% convinced."
Oh, why does it keep dropping? If you guys can still hear me, 1 second.
Is, especially if non-locality is a fact, and anybody that's been on the ship will tell you time and space disappeared, or this experience where the guy goes inside the ship, and there's a lot of people talk about this, going inside the ship, and the ship is as big as they want it to be, and it's the size of a football field, and then the guy got inside, and suddenly there was no time and space. He thought he'd been in the craft. He became disillusioned with the size of this craft, and he went back out. He'd been in there for a couple minutes, and it was 4 hours later. And this is the whole thing. So is time and space actually an event, or are we making it up? And that's what they're sort of showing us, is that they can make this craft as big as they want. There's no time and space. And that's what people have the UFO experiences will talk about. No time and space, all these bizarre effects taking place. And that's why you got to listen to them rather than the stories of sightings. Who cares about how many green ones and red ones are flying around the sky? It's these bizarre things that they're trying to do, is you're looking for these bizarre events, because if these bizarre events are happening, then something's wrong with our idea of physics, because it basically says, it's what Gary Nolan talks about. I'm not interested in the 95% that fall inside the bell curve. When he has somebody doing a dissertation, he says, well, on the bell curve, you got that thing off the bell curve. Why is that happening? And that's the whole idea, is you look at the anomalies. It's the anomalies that tell you something's wrong. That's where you're going to get the discoveries. If you believe, as Max Planck's professor said in 1874, Max, don't go into physics. We got it all figured out. If you do that, there's no curiosity and there's no advancement of science. Science only advances when something weird happens and someone says, why is that happening? I'm going to figure that out, and starts doing experiments. That's how science is doing. And that's what they're doing. They're doing these weird things that make us curious, which make us advance our science. And in the end, we're all going to figure it out. It's not like you're right or wrong. It's eventually, it's a matter of process. So it's what you do with what you've got, not what end result you've got. They're moving us through this path, and it could take generations to do, but they're moving us along through curiosity.
Well, why not, if it's possible, Grant, could you define what you think consciousness is after all the work you've done, after everything you've looked at? What do you think it all boils down to? What is consciousness? I know it's a big question. I know it's a big question.
No, if I were to guess, I mean, this is just speculation. The Bible talks about in the beginning, God moved. So if you talk about people who do, for example, 5-methoxy-DMT, and they'll talk about this, they go back to the oneness. They're in the light, and it's calm, and it's silent. This is primary consciousness. This would be what you call God or the source or whatever.
Right.
When God moves, as Eastern mystics will say, once the vibration starts, the illusion starts, and everything is vibration. So God moves, the vibration starts, and everything starts to move. And we are very dense vibration, which creates the physical. The beings that we're dealing with are in a higher level. They can move through these different levels and go into a less physical environment. For example, the Mission Rama. I've written 2 books on the Mission Rama people. And they have this thing, they're Latino, they're all Roman Catholic, and they have these things where they can open these Zendras. And I talked to people who've been in the Zendras, and the most bizarre sighting I've ever heard in my life, which nobody seems to want to listen to, is one of the stories that happened in 2020 to these people. But what they do is they do oming. If you ever go to their events, I've been to 2. They sit up on Mount Shasta, 4,000 feet up. You freeze to death in the middle of the night because it's 80 during the day, and then it goes below freezing at night, and you're just in your tent just going. And what they do is they do this oming, and they do yoga, and they do meditation and mantras and stuff. And you're going, oh my God, after the second day, you're just like, I can't take this anymore. And what they're trying to do is they're trying to raise their vibration. And then the beings come, and the beings lower their vibration, and they meet in the middle. So that's what I would say consciousness, that everything. So what these beings are just vibrating at a higher level than we are. Same as ghosts, same as that's why you'll see people will describe on board the ship, there's dead people. Nobody questions this. I say, does this not matter to anybody that there's dead people on board the ship? And people will say, this is not possible. The one woman said, she was on a show with me. She said, I was furious. I was absolutely furious. I said, you're playing with my mind. My husband is dead. There's no way that my husband, and she said, I'll pull his shirt up. He has a birthmark on his back. And they pulled the shirt up and showing, oh, there's a birthmark. And the one guy from Las Vegas, they brought his dog. He was furious too. He said they had the gall to bring my dog onto the ship, and that's the whole thing. You start looking at it and you start realizing these people have control. Or if what happens is I did it through high dose psilocybin. I had this experience of knowing everything in the universe. There's somebody with me. There's something with me. I knew the answer to everything. And when I came back, the left brain started to come back online. It shut like a dream, and all is all gone. And all I remember, the same as the near-death experience people, that the UFO experience people, they'll say, I knew the answer to everything. I just don't remember. I just remember that I knew the answer to everything. So you bring this kind of stuff. So that's the whole thing. It's this vibration, and they're at a higher vibration. And if the beings are allowing somebody, an abductee, to see everything in the universe, the beings ain't here to pick up rocks and figure out how the planets work. They know how everything works. They've got access to the field, and because they brought people in there to give access. They got the answer to everything. They're here to lift the consciousness of the world, so that the idea that these are beings exploring and stuff like that never made any sense.
Well, what about Peniston, Grant? I mean, he gets ones and zeros, right? And Rendlesham, why do you think they go with a binary? That's it's computer again. You know what I mean? I always wonder.
Again, they're going according to, in 1980, that was the big thing. It was binary code. Now they're doing a different type of download stuff. Yeah. They'll go according. So there were fairies 200 years ago. They go according to what you believe. Like Barbara Streisand's stepson, if you've ever interviewed him, Barbara Streisand's stepson had an experience, and what he told me was the intelligence. He said to me, he said he said he couldn't believe it. He said, I can't believe it. He said, okay, if you're a damn alien, he said, okay, put something in my head I don't already know. And then they suddenly was in his head, biocentrism. He goes, biocentrism, what's that? And he looks it up, and it's like, it's an actual theory, the idea that biology is central to the universe. And Robert Lanza is the guy that came up with biocentrism. And beyond biocentrism, he wrote these 2 books. And so my friend Chris phones him up, and he says, I got this thing, and I did this UFO and these aliens and whatever. And Robert Lanza says, I support you. You're going to do a documentary on consciousness. And he says, I support you. I'm sort of in a position I can't get involved, but I'll give you an assistant, and he'll help you do whatever you want. Now, what Chris said is, when they talked to him, they said, when we come to your world, we come into your head and we see what's in your head. And whatever's in your head is what we use to give you a message and to teach you something. That's all we can do. And that's where you get this idea where we're at the end of his life. John Mack started to talk about this, and Kit Green has talked about this. The fact that the being that you see is influenced by your mindset, that people who are very fearful will see grace. And then the people if you've ever run into women who've had the reptilian, the best sex they ever had, it always has a sexual component to it. And they're high energy people that are involved in this. And then you get the Mission Rama people say, oh, there's grays and there's these. And I say, I defy you. Go to Mission Rama. There's 25,000 of these people around the world. They've opened these Zendras and had these beings. I defy anybody to go to Mission Rama, of all the experiences, and they've got some pretty wild stories to tell, that saw a gray or a reptilian or a mantid. Absolutely none. Theirs are all like swimmers. They're 10 feet tall. They got this long, beautiful hair, and it's all because that's their religion. They've got a religious
where they're at. Yeah, it's what they want to see, kind of thing.
So you reflect, and Kit Green even says, people in the same experience will see 2 different beings. I remember the one. It was a Rama event where they're allowed 7 people in what they call a Zendra or a portal. So they go in, and the one guy went in, and he was a translator for Paula Harris. And he was 24 years Navy, and he was an architect. And he said, you can't release who I am. I'll lose my job. And he was only in there to be a translator. And I remember the first year Paula Harris and these people were in the Zendra, this guy by the name of Antarel, 10 foot tall, muscular, very stern looking, long hair, sort of very, and the woman was very
Thor,
beautiful.
Yeah, Thor.
Yeah, good idea. And yeah. He came, and there's 7 people in the Zendra, and they all had different experiences. There was different things going on in their head. They were getting different messages. He was talking to 7 people, 7 different conversations at the same time. So the second year, this guy comes in, this Navy guy, and he's the translator, and he's in there. And then all the people in the Zendra were telling me, oh, he was saying it was Antarel again, but this time he was like a hologram. And you could see through him, and you could see the trees in Mount Shasta through him. So I said to this guy, I said, hey, you saw him? He said, I can't believe it. because he'd never had a sighting in his life. Even though there's a translator, he said, I can't believe it. There are extraterrestrials. He said, I'm standing right there. And he's all excited. I said, so he was a hologram. He said, hologram? No, he wasn't. I said, well, yeah, everybody said he was a hologram. He said, look, I was standing close enough. I could see the lines in his face. He was not a hologram. So some people were seeing a hologram and some people were seeing a complete physical being. And that's the whole deal, that it manifests as whatever it wants. And there's an experiencer out of Israel. I helped him publish this book. It's called One. This concept, that's the bottom line message is one. And so he said, they told him, when we come into your world, we take on a body, and we can take on whatever body we want. We don't need to. We have to work in your world. You can do the same thing. You just don't realize it. And that's the whole thing. They come as whatever you're going to relate to, and they're going to come into your head, and people will do different ones. I had the girl, I have to publish her book. The first abductee was a girl by the name of Nancy Tremaine. If you've never interviewed her, she did 2 books. I helped her with the books, published the first book, wrote the foreword to the second book. She had an experience 2 months before Betty and Barney Hill. And she was one of the ones that was into the reptilian thing, about the sex and all that sort of stuff.
Okay. Yeah.
And then so she's talking about it. And then I said, reptilian, Nancy, I said, but you were on the ship when she was 13 years old on board the ship. I said, you were talking to Mr. She calls him Mr. And the beings are always got different names. They always got a different independent name. So she called hers Mr. I said, so reptilian, but was he a reptilian on the ship? She said, no, he was a human being. He had dark hair. He was sitting at a paddleboard. And I said, is he reptilian now? And she says, well, no, now he's sort of etheric. He just comes into my head. So there's the same being, three different types of bodies.
3 different ways.
They can change. We can do the same thing. They're at a higher level, and they can manifest in the physical world and take on a body. That's where it says Shakespeare must have been an abductee, because he said all the world stage, all the men and women and aliens are but actors. They have their entrances and exits, and each man plays many roles. So when Whitley Strieber's wife died, I told him, revolutionary statement she made to him. She came to him and she said, Whitley, I am no longer Anne, but I'll always be Anne to you. And I went, wow. That's exactly. I've left the stage. I was Anne. We had this association, so I was Anne to you, but I'm no longer Anne. I'm off doing another stage. And we have the mistake is the bottom line to all mystical teaching is one message: is remember who you actually are. You are not the puppet. Because you played King Henry VIII in a stage play in grade 12 doesn't mean you're not King Henry VIII. You're playing a puppet. And when you die, or when you have the out-of-body experience and you float away, you realize that's a puppet. And you got to realize you are not the being, you are not the person, you are inside, and you are this higher being that reincarnates, that moves through, that is the spark of the divine, that we come as a spark of the divine, this consciousness, we all go and we build the world out of consciousness. We're creating it, and it's a loop. So you develop stuff, and you can develop good stuff and bad stuff. We can create physical stuff here, we can create stuff in the spiritual world, and we're creating this stuff. If you commit suicide, you're going to leave this trace where people are going to pick up ghosts and stuff like that.
So what do you think? And I don't mean to jump in, Grant. I mean, so did you get a chance to see what Grush said on Rogan? I know Joe Rogan just interviewed him. I mean, what did you think when he said, 3D creation is, having babies? What if 4D creation is essentially creating universes or clusters of consciousness? I mean, when you hear Grush say that, what does that make you think? What was your take on that?
Well, if again, I'm reticent of once you start using nouns, 3-dimension, 4-dimension, and it's like you're working off physics. They're trying to explain this through physics, and they have this idea that there's going to be wormholes and they're going to be able to bend time and space and all this kind of stuff. And I think that when you come right down to it, this is all creation. It's the guy that's the closest is Deepak Chopra. The way Deepak Chopra says it explains it, and if you understand the concept, this is how I think it works. Everything is an activity inside consciousness. There is nothing but consciousness and these activities, and we're feeding it into the universe, and the universe is getting more complex, and we're creating good and bad, and it's like an exciting thing. Like God's got his popcorn, he goes in the movie, and then Matthew maybe say, oh, I love my wife, or I love my kid, and I love, and then God's going, oh, this is pretty boring, I'm getting out of here. He goes to the next movie where it's like, up and down, and it's this idea that the universe is a loop, and we're feeding it. It's getting bigger and more elaborate and more conscious, and all these experiences and stuff. And I think that's basically what's happening. But we make the mistake of falling into delusion. We believe this physical thing that it's physical and it's separate from consciousness.
Because you moved away from nuts and bolts, Grant. I mean, years ago, right? I mean,
I was absolutely nuts and bolts until February the 26th of 2000. No, the consciousness thing. The
2012, right? That's when you had your download. 2012.
2012. That was when I came
Yeah.
to the absolute certainty. But still, I thought it was like ESP. It was something like part of the brain that they were using ESP to do this kind of stuff.
Like Ben
That
Rich
sort
was
of the
talking
impression.
about, kind of
And
like
as
what
it
Ben
went,
Rich was saying.
almost
Yeah.
like most people's downloads will develop as they go along, and it'll get more and more complex, and stuff will add into there. Well, I guess it was the woman in 2013, this Pam Dupuis, who they said, "Are you going to talk to Pam Dupuis? You're still going to talk to her?" And I went, "Yeah, I guess so." I didn't know if I agreed to talk to this woman. That's good. And then the one, she's in her 70s, that said, "Oh, I was flying the craft last night." No, like, what? I'm listening to, she's a adoptee and she does remote viewing for the government and all sorts of stuff. I heard all that crap before. And I go, "You're flying the craft?" And I said, "Really?" I couldn't believe it. It's like, I was thinking, all I could think in my head was a Saudi Arabian woman can't drive a car without a man in the car. And I'm going, "Let you, no insurance, like no driver's license. They're gonna let you fly the craft. Come on." It's like, and so I didn't know what to say. So I said, "You flew the craft?" And she said, "Yeah, I've flown 3 different models." "Right." And I said, "So how do you fly craft?" She said, "Oh, you do it with your mind." And as soon as she said that, I realized this thing. And that's when that shift started to move away. Was this maybe not as physical as you think it is? Or if you've ever interviewed the guys, the head of MUFON for Japan, I mean, he's the guy that developed this technique through the Monroe Institute where you can do out of body experience. And then he said, what can I do with this?" He said, "I think I'll go to see if there's grays." And of course, he would immediately think in his head, as soon as he's out of his body, "I want to go see the Greys," and boom, he'd be on a ship. And he had 22 experiences in 2022 with Greys. And he would tell these bizarre stories that the Gray would say, he would ask a question and the Gray would put his hand against the wall and the book would come out of the wall. And you start hearing that kind of stuff, or the idea that they can make the craft as big as they want. Then you start realizing it's all made out of consciousness, and these people know how to do it, and we can do the same thing. But we think there's the 30-foot craft, and it's gonna be 30 feet in the inside, and that's why this guy was so disoriented. And anybody who says to me that we got crafts that we do on the inside as outside, so that's why they're dropping these crafts. That's why Bob Bigelow. They asked Bob Bigelow, "Is Roswell real?" And Bob Bigelow said, "Yeah. He says that happened." He says, "Yeah, but there's also been a crash in Russia, and there's one in China, and there's been one in South America." And he said, "I think they're seeding them." And that's what Tim Taylor from NASA said. The guy the top guy there, written up in American Cosmic. I had a meeting with this guy. I met him one time at a cabin, and he says, "Do you think they came across the galaxy and then start crashing?" He said, "This is gifting. They're dropping the stuff." And that changes the whole attitude that they are actually leaving crafts there for people to pick up. And what happens is we go through and we think, "Oh, we're going to build weapons with this. We're going to build a new thing." But where it's going to lead, the same as this disclosure is going to lead, is they lead you to the fact that you think it's all going to be technology. We're going to have, free energy, and we're going to be able to wipe the Russians out, and we're going to whatever.
So that's a waste of time. I mean, do you think at that
but
point?
that's what they're leading us. That's where everybody's going. But what happens is on the route, everybody suddenly realizes when they make the disclosure that there's this psychic component which nobody believes now. Everybody still thinks it's aliens from other planets, and there's no physical. They still say that's all garbage, even though Lukatsky says they know for a fact that the physics has something to do with the technology. But when that happens, then the whole of science, because you think that it's toxic to talk about UFOs. It is absolutely toxic if you're going to go onto a campus on the United States and talk about ESP,
right.
And there's no way. And so you're going to have another shift as soon as it comes and says, the government says consciousness is part of this. This is how they move the craft around. And then suddenly, boom, everybody's going to start studying consciousness.
Do you think we're getting ready for a letdown then? I mean, in the sense of, even if they were able to get the technology out, get documents out, and they're going to say, "Hey, yeah, the stuff's here, but we can't use it," and everyone's just kind of let down from that? I mean, do you think that's what we're looking for?
Then you're going to get everybody starting to patent things. That's what happened in psychedelics. I always said, when I started my psychedelic experiment, when I experienced what I experienced, then I said, I realized that this may be the thing that brings disclosure. Because what happened was, unlike UFOs where nobody can make any money at it, psychedelics, what happened was they started to realize that you can have depression. 80% of people, and this is combat depression, that is incurable with antidepressants, that you can cure that, or smoking, 80% success ratio after 6 months, cocaine addiction, heroin addiction, people that are freaking out about dying, they have a 5-dose session and they come out and say, "Oh, I'm ready to die," it's like, and just absolutely revolutionary. but you need the people to run the thing. You need the psilocybin bought through. It's not clean. It's not off the street and stuff like that. And it's in a hospital. And then you have all these therapists that talk to you before and after. And suddenly there's a pile of money in psychedelics. So everybody says, oh, there's 200 new companies that have formed to do psychedelics, and everybody's trying to patent anything in psychedelics because they realize there's so much money in psychedelics in terms of treating people for depression and stuff like that. But what happens is when you have all these experiences, they're into the money and they're into the results and stuff. All these people are saying, holy God, like I was the one, like my dead mother. It's like, my dead mother, holy cow, mom. It's like, and all these stories start to leak out about what happens when you're under. And that's what's happening. It's coming in through the back door. Same as the UFO experience. You're going to say, oh, these experiences, let's talk to the abductees. And then the abductees start talking about there's no time and space. It's non-local. There's TSP and all that stuff comes in the back door and it gets accepted. So it's one step to move us to the point where we accept the fact that UFOs are real and the government admits it. Then everybody says, yeah, but what about that ESP thing? What about the craft being bigger on the inside than outside? And science is going to start studying it. Right now, science won't touch it because there's no money in it and nobody believes it. They believe, yeah, there's UFOs in the sky, but they're probably just extraterrestrials.
Well, I get that, Grant. I mean, the big thing with me is how do you, you've interviewed so many experiencers though, and you've got to know that there's times where in a situation where you go, I don't know if this guy's making something up. I mean, how are you differentiating there? Because there has to be a certain percentage, Grant, that there's
nobody. No, there's nobody making it up.
You think it's all 100% what they're doing?
I always tell the story. Like you get people that are telling the story, and like this woman. She tells me a story. I was flying the craft. Now, if you want to make up a story about being on a craft, that's not something you want to put in the story. That come on. No, but they're not even going to believe the UFO thing. Forget about I was a 70-year-old lady flying the craft. Or people are on board the ship and they say, I could see in 360 degrees. And I'm going, hey, that's out-of-body experience. Those people with out-of-body experience talk about I mean, that makes no sense to say, oh, I could see in 360 degrees. Yeah, sure you could. Yeah, first you're suddenly on a UFO. And you start seeing these weird patterns. Or the fact that you put your hand on something, you become one with the craft, and the craft is alive, and wherever you want to go, you can instantly go. You hear that enough times, and you go like, holy cow, they're all telling the same story, or basically the same
I do
story.
find that interesting with your work, though. I mean, everyone does. I mean, all the stories are very similar. I always have to ask, Grant, because I'm trying to, like I said, I'm trying to understand everything that's going on here with everything. And I always wonder, how much of that is linked and how much is somebody telling a story.
But how do you tell the story? How do you tell this bizarre part of the story?
I hear you.
Yeah, that's true. They're gonna think you're crazy right off the get-go.
Yeah, and you hear that because enough times, and then when Lakatsky came and said that all the stories are different, all the UFO sightings are different, that's when I went back and I said, hey, that's the same as the UFO. That's the same as the UFO. Or let me tell you a story. When you get all these crossovers, that when you listen to experiences, like one is the Ron Johnson guy. So Ron Johnson has this being. His name is LB. And he's had these things, and he says, all out-of-body experiences. I said, are they all out-of-body experience, or are you actually being taken? He believes he's being taken sometimes, but a lot of times it's out-of-body experience. They take him into the spirit world 3 times. Now, I'll show you the connection. When you start seeing these connections where there's no way these people are making it up. So he says, LB takes me into the spirit world 3 times. The first time is like Eben Alexander's story, where he's sort of in the mud. He's in another environment, but it's dark and he doesn't really see anything. And then the second one, he's there with his dead mother. And he can't see her, but he's in this level where he's able to talk to his dead mother. In the third one, he is with his mother. LB takes him to the spirit world. He's with his dead mother, and they're in a field. And it's his real comedy. He's talking to his mother, and LB's there, and he says, and then she says, Ron, over there, and he looks over, and he says, there's this building. Now he's a Mormon guy. So he says, it looks like a temple in Nephi, Utah. I can't remember the exact town, a small little Mormon temple. And she said, Ron, when you die, you're going to get a room in this building. And your dad has a room in the building, and he sees the wall open up like a portal, and he can see his father inside this building. So she says, come in, I'll show you inside. And he goes inside, and there's all these sort of pictures of his mother along the wall, like pillars and stuff. And he says, I go inside, and he says, it's like 10 or 100 times the size it is outside. And I'm going, hey, I've heard that before. That's what the UFO people say. It's the size of a football field inside. And I said, so is he in a UFO or is he in the spirit world or what's going on? And then he's in there and she shows him all this stuff. And then you have the next one that happens. So he says, she takes me to the far end of the room and there's this table with these crystals in them. I go, crystals in the table? And I've heard this before. And then he says, and she's Ron, when you don't have a crystal, but when you die, a crystal will come out of this table and you'll be able to see in the crystal, you'll be able to see your life, the whole life. And he looks and his dog's crystal's there. And he said his dog disappeared in 1972 and his dog's crystal was there. And so he looked at the crystal and you look at it at a certain angle and he says, I always wondered what happened to my dog. And he said, I looked at the crystal and I saw that my neighbor shot the dog, threw him in the back of a pickup, took him to the dump and threw him in the dump. And I'm going like, the crystals? And if you've done enough cross work, I'm a big Michael Newton fan. I saw him lecture publicly. He's the guy that does Life Between Lives, the 7,000 regressions he did. And he takes people into the spirit world, lets them die, and then takes them into the spirit world, what's happening in the spirit world, and all this kind of stuff. And he tells the story that when you're in the spirit world, you have these libraries, and you go into these libraries, and there's these books, and you open the book, and there's a crystal, and you look at the crystal, and you see the crystal, and you can see your past lives, and everybody's planning for their next life. What am I going to do in my next life? What do I want to achieve? Whatever. And I'm going, that's the same story. It's the crystal. You look at it at a certain angle. And then if you followed Richard Doty plays the Falcon in 1988 in a documentary. Everybody says terrible documentary, which they were leaking stuff. It was CIA. It was the last days of the Reagan administration. They were just seeking. And one of the stories that Richard Doty tells is the most amazing thing he saw with the aliens was the aliens had a crystal. And they had the crystal, and you could see the history of the world. And they showed the
I remember that. Yeah.
The crucifixion of Jesus Christ. So you have these three stories of the crystal, the same story. And you go like,
Grant, I hear you. I mean, if it wasn't for the Pascagoula, abduction story, I mean, that's the one that really hangs on to me, because when they left the room, they left the tape recorder on and they were still talking to each other, telling the story. I mean, that's the one case that really opened me up to that. Yeah.
And again, you see the pattern. I've written that pattern in Tales of Charlie Red Star, because I started in 75. And the reason I started in 75, the reason we had the sightings there, I talked to the guy who had it was a small town, and I had a sighting, then I had another sighting 2 nights later, even closer. And then I started investigating all these people, did a manuscript, and half the people in the town, or 59% of the people in the town had seen the thing and they didn't want to talk about it and all sorts of stuff. I went back to the guy who ran the airport and said, Bob, why were they here? I mean, Carmen's got nothing. It's just a little town. It's wheat farms, nothing. He said, you know why they're here? And I said, no, Bob, it's been 35 years. I have no clue why they were here. He said, I told you in 1975 why they're here. And I go, Bob, I don't know why they're here. He said, the missile silos. I told you, the missile silos. And I go, oh yeah. Suddenly realized that we live north of North Dakota. And the story was that if North Dakota had been a country, it would have been a nuclear superpower. It had 300 nuclear Minuteman III missiles and silos. And we'd gone through North Dakota, we'd see one in that field, see one in this field. We knew what the missiles were and stuff. And we always knew that if there was a nuclear war, we were gone, because the Russians would launch every 10th one short on top of us in Winnipeg here. And so there was this
let's hope not,
there was this connection that they built the only anti-ballistic missile unit that ever went operational in the United States, was built in 1975 in Coolroot, North Dakota. And they've had a pyramid. They're actually maybe going to do a movie on this. There was a pyramid where they were trying to pick up the Russians coming over the North Pole and stuff like this. And then they put in 100 new nuclear missiles that they were trying to get the Russian missile when it was in outer space. They'd take a 5 megaton and explode it in outer space, and it would shred this missile as it was coming in. Because what you're trying to protect is not Washington and New York and Chicago. You're trying to protect the missile silos, because if you don't protect the missile silos, you ain't going to see what's going to happen next. You've got to protect your missile silos. So that's the number one target of the Russians, is these missile silos. So they put it in, and of course we started getting all these sightings. So when you get to Pascagoula, I started looking at all the big sightings. Pascagoula happened in 1973 in the middle of the Yom Kippur War. And the Yom Kippur War involved nuclear missiles. Most people don't know that. The Israelis were getting badly hammered, and I think it was what's her name, the prime minister, the female prime minister. They loaded 13 planes with nuclear missiles. And the deal was that they would drop these nuclear missiles if they were to lose. So that involved nuclear missiles. Same as in 1967, that was the whole thing with the shutting down Malmstrom. That was a couple months, that was a couple weeks before the Israelis shot down 6 Syrian planes, which started the Six-Day War, which also involved nuclear missiles. The reason the Six-Day War happened was because the Russians were going to take out Dimona. That was a whole cover for the Six-Day War. Was the Russians, the Egyptians are going to go in there, and then the Russians were going to come and take out Dimona as a cover, and that's when the Israelis were building their first 2 atomic bombs. In exactly when they shut down the Malmstrom, the thing at Malmstrom, and you start seeing these connections of all these missile silo things to nuclear weapon stories around the world, and you realize, oh, this stuff's all connected. Or if you hear the one with that Ross tells in Australia, he tells a story about the UFO over the American facility that kept in contact with the Polaris submarines in the Indian Ocean that had the nuclear missiles. The sighting that he talked about happened exactly the same time as the Pascagoula case. It happened during the Yom Kippur War, and it was the whole idea that the beings were sending a message that, you know, we're going to shut this thing down, because that's what the Canadians were told in the 1950s. The guy that ran the Canadian government program said that the AFA, the being that he was dealing with, said, we are not here. We are never going to interfere with the human race. The only time we will is if there's a nuclear exchange, and we can stop a nuclear exchange. And we can prove to the world we can stop a nuclear exchange. We can take the world in front of the entire world. We can split the moon in half, put it back together in front of the entire world to prove that we can stop a nuclear exchange. Other than a nuclear exchange, we will allow the human race to stew in its own juices.
Well, I'll tell you, that's why I've always wished that. French, did you want to add something there?
No, it was interesting. I didn't know that about the missiles and stuff, Pascagoula.
Yeah, no, for me, that Grant, that's why I've always wished, and I hope still, that we've been able to back engineer some of this stuff. I mean, if the Tic Tac was something that was ours, I mean, that's a good anti-nuke. I'm hoping, that's also something that could get in the way of something like that, right?
But anything is useful for water, can be used.
I get what you
one way or the other. Same with metal. And what has happened is this being taken over by the military-industrial complex. That the idea, you even hear Danny Sheehan, and I'm sure he's upsetting some UFO people, is he's saying that this company that the high level UFO people went to, I can't remember, the name is escaping, Radiance.
Travis Taylor and them, right?
That they're building this missile, this hypersonic missile that you can't respond to. It'll be in Russia in 30 seconds. I mean, it's a super fast missile.
Oh, okay.
And that they're going to use the technology to build a faster missile. And Danny makes the point that we're the people that started this whole thing. We built an atomic bomb, which caused the Russians to build an atomic bomb, which caused the Chinese to build an atomic bomb. Then we built a hydrogen bomb, which caused the Russians to be threatened, and they built a hydrogen bomb. And it's always this thing that we just keep upping the deal. And so everybody's looking at this thing that we're going to build better weapons, and that doesn't solve the problem. It's this whole idea that we want to rule the world and we want to destroy people. And so luckily, I don't think that we've got some stuff that's come from them technologies. The one is Tim Taylor, who told me about his, because I was into the download. I had the download experience, and he had the download experience where he gets this invention that's talked about in American Cosmic, but his are all medical inventions. He had the one that went on the space shuttle. He told me how he tried to get on the space shuttle and it was blocked, and he got some scientists to sign off on this thing, and the thing actually worked. It has to do with tissue not being rejected, metal implants not being rejected by tissue. He got that from the beings, or whoever he considers, and he talks about the downloads, same as Gary Nolan, who says, I don't know if it's elves in my head, but I know how to make it work. And he talks about how he puts he works through the problem, and he puts a piece of paper beside the bed, and in the morning or the next day, the answer's in his head. Tim Taylor gets a glass, he sleeps for 8 hours, then he gets up, then he goes back to bed for 1 hour, then he gets up and he gets a big glass of water, and he goes in Florida and he sits on the deck in the sun and drinks the water, and the beings start talking to him. And he's got 40 patents. So we are getting patents, but I don't think that we're having much success with the military stuff. We may have with metals. That's why I say with the metals, it's like, come on, give your head a shake. No two pieces of metal are the same. Even if you get Gary Nolan, when you got the Uba Tuba one, I was laughing and I was making jokes about, and he commented on it, but I said, come on, this is a joke. I mean, it's the same crash site, and the one has all the isotopes all messed up, and the other one has the isotopes not messed up, and the beings are just buckled over and laughing and say, oh my God, we got to go on this one, because what they're doing is they're dropping this metal. I even said that to Hal Puthoff. I said, come on, Hal, this is apportations. They're dropping this stuff. You don't fly across the galaxy and then little pieces start falling off the flying saucer. They're dropping this stuff on purpose, and they're all different. because what happened with him, and he said to me, he said, we'll analyze the material one step at a time. So he didn't deny that what I was saying, because what happened is when they're doing their remote viewing program, they had Uri Geller, and there's a story told, I don't know if you know the story, where Uri Geller is eating the ice cream and he bites down and he cuts his lip, and he pulls this piece of metal coming out of the ice cream, and then Edgar Mitchell sitting at the table with Hal Puthoff, and Edgar Mitchell said, "That's my flight pin. Where'd you get my flight pin from? I lost that in Houston 2 years ago." And he takes the flight pin, and the back half is missing. And they go to the lab, and they're standing. Uri Geller is in one room, Hal Puthoff and Edgar Mitchell in the other room, and they hear his tink in behind them, and they look, and the back half of the flight pin is behind them. So I said to Hal, "You know how this works. They drop this stuff. It's to get you curious. It's to get you to do." And that's why I say they're dropping this stuff on purpose. The layered one, they say, "Man, we'll really get them going with this layered 83 things." And everybody says, "Oh, if we get this piece of metal, we can build a flying saucer." It's like, no, they're just getting you curious. They're doing this weird stuff. I've even got 3 pieces of metal. I mean, it's like, this is a dime a dozen type stuff, and every piece is different. And they've been dropping them. The one we had out of the University of Arizona, we had was 1939, where this thing came flying out of the sky, and the guy's watching this thing, and it lands in his yard. And it's 99% pure nickel, which they couldn't compose in the sky at that time. And it has this copper core in the middle of this thing. It has this bubbly head on the thing. And the guy takes it to his daughter, gets it. And then in the 1960s, it ends up at NASA, because they're looking at the space program, and they have a lab there. And they just say, "Well, we don't know. It's just, it's very pure nickel." And so one's made out of nickel, one's pure, one's layered, and it's all these different things. And it's just, the intelligence to me is just, it's doing this weird stuff. It's almost like, if you believe it's ETs, it's like ETs. They have the grade 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 class, and say, "We got this environment, these people that got the nuclear weapons now. We got to get a message to them. We got to wake them up. We got to get them to realize they are not physical beings, that they have a higher thing, and it's all one. They have to work as one. If they keep separating and fighting against each other, separation will kill everybody. And so what are we going to do?" And then the grade 1 class says, "Hey, I know what we should do. We should get some ships and put lights on them and fly them around." And then grade 2 class says, "Oh, we should build crop circles. We should crop circles." And then the grade 3 class says, "Hey, let's mutilate some cattle downwind and down from nuclear power activity." And it's like all these different things, and they're doing all these different things. But to me, it's all raising consciousness. And you start looking at it, and you start seeing this. There's only one way to explain this bizarre thing, especially the 90-degree turns. Or in the sky, when the second night I saw it, first night it came right in front of the car, close enough that it wanted to say, "Grant, you are not going to doubt." And I've never thought about UFO sightings, because I was close enough. There was no doubt when I was looking at something pretty spectacular. The second night we were there, all my friends came, and then they all left 15 minutes before this thing came and said, "Oh, we're going back to Winnipeg." I said, "No, you got to see this. If you see this, man, this is unbelievable." And they said, "No, we're hungry. We're going back for pizza." All my friends took off. And there were 8 people left. And I remember there was a flash in the sky, like a flash cube, boom, in the sky. And there were some kids there, and they were in the field, and they said, "Is that it?" I go, "I guess so." And it was what I saw the first night. And then it flashed again, and it was jumping around the sky. Like, and it was some young kids that I interviewed there when their parents weren't home. I asked them, and they said, "Hey, we watched the bouncing ping pong ball." And I go, "Yeah, I've seen that." And it was like flash, 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 flash. It was jumping around the sky, 8 inches in the field of vision. It was jumping all over the place. And I remember the one guy had a camera, and it had a motor drive. It was a Nikon camera. It had a motor drive where it would advance the film very fast, 35 millimeter film. Sure. I can just remember it was going click, zzz, click, zzz, click, and he's unloading the camera as this thing's coming. And this girl was there. She couldn't see it. She's, "I can't see it. I can't see it. Oh, where is it? I can't see it." And she's crying, and people are swearing and yelling and stuff like that. And as this thing came, and as it got closer, then it appeared like similar to the first night I saw it, except it had a green glow on the back. And this thing came, and then it flew at me, and then it sort of turned, and it sort of went back where it came from. And it was that question that led me to everything, because it was going away. And there was a couple of years later, I'm thinking to myself, why did it came from there, it came to me, and then it went back sort of where it came from. Why didn't it just go from there to there? Why did it have to come to me? And I'm thinking, like, because I was thinking as I was flying away, I thought, that could be an extraterrestrial from another planet. That is just wild. And then I'm thinking, what's it doing? It's not doing anything.
Well, I gotta ask you, Grant. If you don't mind me jumping in, I gotta ask you. I mean, because you've given us so much information tonight. I've been trying to just let you go, because I mean, it's so fun to listen to hear you talk. But I mean, just kind of maybe switching gears a little bit. Does the topic ever frustrate you? I mean, how do you ever get fatigued with all of this at any point, or are you just so interested? I mean, 50 years, Grant, you've really been out there. I mean, does it ever begin to wear?
Well, yeah, I have the down thing. So even today, it's sort of like, you want the answers so fast that you sort of get frustrated that your message is not getting across. But I firmly believe I've been led. I can give you almost every book that I have. I'll give you one example that I get led, and nothing's really happening by accident. So I'm good friends with Chris Bledsoe. I had this very bizarre experience that's going to be in his movie. There's a movie coming out. You're going to see this experience.
Yeah, I
with
heard
the
they're
dog.
doing that. Yeah.
That was, I was with him when this dog thing happened. So I knew it was the real deal. And so he phones me one day, this back in 2014 or whatever, and he says to me, he says, "Hey, Grant, I got a message from the Guardians for you." And I go, "Message for me? Really? Cool." I said, what do they want me to know? And he said, "They want you to know the messages in the music." And that's when I said, "Well, Chris, you may be talking to the wrong guy, because I don't listen to music. My mother's a church organist. My sisters played. My father built theater organs, and everybody's into music. I couldn't care less. I'm a radio talk guy. I never listen to music, and I can't play anything." And whatever he said, "Oh, well, you should listen to Kashmir by Led Zeppelin." I go, "Whatever, Chris." And he even later, he said, a couple of years later, he said, "Grant, are you ever going to listen to Kashmir by Led Zeppelin?" And so I said, "Okay, whatever." And I'm just sort of ignoring him. It's like, this is not my bag. And then he says, "Oh, and the other one you should listen to is After the Gold Rush by Neil Young." And I went, "Neil Young is involved in this thing?" And he goes, "Yeah." And I said, "I live in Winnipeg, Manitoba, Canada. It's the one city in Canada where not even Canadians want to visit. Neil Young grew up here." And I go, "Holy cow, Neil Young's involved in this?" And that's how they got me. And then I went and looked at the lyrics to the song, and it talks about the chosen ones. The silver seeds are going to come and take the chosen ones to another planet, and the world's bombed out and stuff like that. And it's this experiencer message that the chosen ones are what Yvonne Smith calls the experiencers. And so when I saw that, and then I realized all these other musicians were singing this song, and they were experiencers, and they're singing this after the gold rush, probably not even know why they're singing the song. And that dragged me down there. And I've had almost every book, there's been some bizarre event that I know I got to do a book. There's just some bizarre.
So something always pops up that just keeps you here.
Almost every time. Yeah.
Every time. Okay. I mean, do you ever plan on hanging up your hat though? Do you ever, I mean, you have so many books, Grant. I mean, is there a point where you said, "Hey, once I get to 20, I'm done," or I mean, because I feel like with your personality, with the way you're looking at everything, Grant, you could go for 100 more years if you wanted to,
Yeah,
like,
to me, it's a game. To me, I've always seen it like a chess game. That's why I say I was very good at playing chess. I stopped playing chess as a kid because I never wanted to lose. So I grade 6, I was playing with grade 12s. I was being moved to another school to play, and this is like a chess game. So it's like, to me, there's no money in it. There's, once you've written 17 books or whatever it is, you really, you don't need to do that anymore. But to me, it sort of drags you back in. It's like this sort of mystery, like playing the game. You're trying to play the chess game, and that's where I think that people miss the thing. Is the way you have to look at the UFO thing or the paranormal thing is you got to look at the board, and the way you play the chess game is you do not make a move until you know what your opponent is doing. You say, "Why did he move that piece? What is he doing?" And then suddenly you realize, "Oh, I know what he's going to try to come in the back door over there." And then you can set the trap for him, because you pretend, "Oh, I don't see what he's doing." And you set a trap that he thinks he's got it, and he's going to make a move. And that's what I look at the UFO thing is, when you see something bizarre, I look at the UFO phenomena like this thing about 90-degree turns. Why is it doing a 90-degree turn? Like, what's that all about? And it's so I play it that way. So to me, it's like an interesting. I've tried to get out of the UFO thing many times, the disclosure thing. I say this is absolute nonsense. What difference does it make if the president knows? Because that's what we came up with this Dr. Eric Walker, and he told us, he said, "You're just curious. Admit you're just curious."
why should we change the rules just because you're curious?
The rules? When he said rules, I went, rules. And that was the whole deal. Is it doesn't really matter whether the president knows. So I've tried to get out of the disclosure thing. In fact, I got 2 disclosure books coming out right now, and it's like it just sort of drags you back in, because I like to do the consciousness thing. I like to do the weird thing. I'm doing an experiment on consciousness that will change everything. I'm interviewing a guy named Mario Beauregard in a couple of days, and he's a neurologist that talks about consciousness being primary and all this kind of stuff. And I have an experiment which I've been trying to do, and that was an experiment that Jay-Z Knight was a channeler. I got very much into channelers, and I maintain anybody thinks they can channel and fool me, I got a test, $1,000, get ready to lose your money, because the channelers are doing exactly what some of these guys, the stuff they're doing is there's no way you can do it without.
Well, I'll be honest, Grant. I mean, if everything comes out and you end up being correct, I mean, there's going to be a gold rush to all of your work. like you've never seen before. I
Yeah,
mean,
and,
not
and when,
not in like the sense of you're gonna make a ton of money. I don't mean it like that. I mean, I just think that
no,
I've always noticed, Grant, that you've always been kind of like 100,000 feet above everybody in a different direction on this field, and this is why
yeah,
I've always liked to listen to you.
but
Is just
part
a
of
different perspective.
part of the reason is this idea that I've had so many of these experiences where I'm able to shut the left brain. I do a lot of walking. I walk 20,000 steps a day. And it's not because, I go to McDonald's. People say, you like drinking McDonald's? I said, I don't really, I like to walk there. It's a mile and a half there, walk a
I
mile
don't
and a
like
half there.
McDonald's coffee, Grant. I'm not a fan of their coffee, but
And so I go back and forth. And that's my way of getting in the field. So I've had so many experiences. And as I said, when I had the experience, and people who have had it will tell you, it comes with absolute certainty. It's the idea. It's like get in the field and they show you something and you go, oh yeah, I saw that before. Now I remember. Yeah, okay, thank you. You see it and it's like you've seen it before. And so that's where that excites me, this idea. And I had the one experience that hopefully I'll get to write the book. I had the experience in 2016, the major download experience, where I got 24 things. And it basically outlined everything. It basically said, is it random or is it pattern? Is it consciousness or is it matter? Is it this? Is it that? And it's like you think it's this, it's actually that. There was. I remember I was walking down the street and it was very cold. I got my glove off, and it came. I was actually leaving McDonald's. I'm heading downtown for a 6 mile walk, and all of a sudden it started to come, and I knew because I'd had the experience before. Get the pen out. It's coming, and it's like it's absolute certainty. And I'm writing this stuff down. And I'm writing it down, and there's about 15 things came, and then I sort of I put the pen away. And then I started walking again. All of a sudden, it started again. I pulled the pen out and I wrote it down. It was this thing. So I've had these moments where I've had the experiences. And I wrote a book called Inspired, where I look at Nobel Prize winners and I look at people with inventions. Like most people don't realize, like the theory of relativity. Everybody thinks, "Oh, smart guy, Albert Einstein." People don't realize he had the dream of the toboggan. And there was a quote that I'm not sure that is attributed to him, but it's been given. Said he said it. He said, "I knew I had to understand that dream. In fact, you could say, and I would say, that my entire career was based upon a meditation on that dream." That's the idea. I know this is significant.
well, yeah, J.K. Rowling was an interesting one for me. She never
Yeah,
wrote anything before, and then she put, I think, one of the greatest series ever of all
yeah,
time,
and it came
all of a sudden down.
instantaneously in a couple
Yeah,
of seconds, including the line in the first line in the book where he'll be famous. Whatever the guy's name.
Harry Potter. Yeah,
Harry Potter will be
yeah,
famous,
yeah.
and that was the thing. So and I looked at the two Nobel, like the Nobel Prize for uh, the hologram, the Nobel Prize for the laser, were the same thing that Gary Nolan uses. The same thing I use. This process, you work through it, but then you have to quiet the mind. And these guys were sitting there. One was sitting there waiting for a restaurant, sitting on a park bench, which is now a statue. It's actually been made into a statue. That was Towns sitting on this thing, and he was just sitting there waiting for the restaurant to open. All of a sudden, boom! The idea came in his head. He goes running back to the lab and writes it down. And the guy that invented the hologram was sitting there watching people play tennis, and it put the idea popped in his head. The idea of the quantum atom, this whole quantum atom idea, came to Bohr in a dream where they take him and there's a horse track. And the idea is they have these areas around the atom where we have these shells, and
Yeah.
he's shown the horses, and the horse can't step on the line. It has to slow down or speed up to go in the next line, and that hasn't been confirmed. But that actually describes that, and you get this idea that people think that smart people. There's actually a study done on they did a study 1915, Stanford University. They took the 1,540 smartest kids in California. You need 140 IQ to get in. 25% of the kids had IQs of 180 or better. And they tracked these kids, 1,540 kids through their entire life, and nobody did a damn thing. None of them. One was the head of the American Psychological Association, but other than that, they were just ordinary people. And this is the idea. Very, very, very smart people aren't very creative. It's the idea of creativity is the ability to shut the left brain down. In fact, there was these two Nobel Prize winners who were in that they were going to put in the study, and they said, no, these kids don't qualify for the study. They're just too bizarre. And these guys won a Nobel Prize and they were kicked out of the study. So
That's interesting. Yeah.
this idea that there's a field, you can get into the field, And we're being taught this by the beings. And so you'll have people who have download experiences, people who have the UFO experiences. You'll see the orbs start to happen, and they start getting downloads. They start getting messages. They get told, are people that read a book. I said, hey, you wrote the book? Did they tell you to write the book? And they go, yeah, I think so. And then I say, did they help write the book? Yeah, they helped me write the book. And you see this over and over again, this idea that we're on a mission. And so the bottom line to the whole life thing is, you agreed to come in. If all the world's a stage, you came, you probably didn't come in here randomly and say, well, let's see what happens. You planned to do something. You looked in the crystal and you said, I'm going to do this. I'm going to work on envy. I'm going to work on greed. I'm going to whatever. And you come in, and when you leave, according to Michael Newton, everybody goes in front of a panel between 3 and 12 people. And you have your spirit guide standing on your left side behind you. And they ask you one question: how'd it work out? And everybody says the same thing: I could have done better, because you worked it out. You can't say, oh, my mother-in-law, the dog ate my homework. They go, time out. This is about you. You planned this thing. And that's where you start seeing again the crossovers to the UFO experience. When I saw Jim Semivan, people would say, abduction's really bad. Keep in mind that if Jim Semivan had not had the beings in his room, abduction, whatever happened there, and he's very upset about it, if that had not happened, there would be no disclosure. Because Jim Semivan is the guy that went to the 3-layer agencies and said, you guys can't get this out. We're going to drop this thing. We're not going to release classified material. We're going to drop this. We're going to disclose this thing. That's how the New York Times got the story, because he had been abducted. So he's being asked a question when he doesn't want to talk about his experience. He said, oh, they're still working on it. I really don't want to talk about it. I'm sad about it, whatever. And they say, was there telepathy involved? And he said, yeah, that was the most interesting part. He said, I was there. And he said, I don't know if it was a mantid or a tall gray. There was a being behind me, and it had this guardian type thing going on about it. I went, guardian type thing? That's a spirit guide. That's Michael Newton. That's the spirit guide sitting on the left side. So I asked the interviewer, I said, go back to Jim, ask him, was the being on this left or right side? And you see this crossover, that you this connection, where I started. So then I asked the people. I couldn't go back and re-interview the 35 people, but I'd ask people. I started looking, and sure enough, that guy that was the U.S. Air Force colonel, he's telling me. I remember him telling the story. I said, yeah. I go back and look at the story. Sure enough, he said, I'm on board of the ship. I'm just standing on the ship. I'm on the ship, and there's somebody behind me, and they're talking to me, and they say, go ahead and do it. And he said, I don't know what to do. And the voice behind him says, you know what to do. Just do it. And he goes and puts his hands on the panel, and this F-16 guy starts flying the UFO, but there's a being behind, there's somebody behind him, and they're not allowed to look. So then I'm doing Whitley Strieber. Whitley Strieber was at the panel, and he was flying the craft, and he was sitting the craft. And I said, hey, Whitley, did you ever have beings standing behind you that you couldn't see, and they were telling you what to do? And he said, all the time. He said, in fact, when I was standing at the panel board, and I was thinking to myself, I think I'd like to steal this thing. He said, telepathically, you could hear somebody behind him laughing. And this is the idea. You start seeing these connections, and you start seeing these things that you couldn't make up. The idea that somebody's standing behind you and you're not allowed to look, and you think it's a gray or whatever. But it was when Jim Semivan had this guardian type thing going on about it. And I go, oh, then the bell came on, and it was like everybody else was saying the same thing. This idea. So it may be like a spirit guide. It's an experience. You think it's an abduction experience, and it's a thing. The spirit guide is pretending to be an alien, and you're on board their ship, and they're teaching you about consciousness, and all this may be just play that they set up to play. You're part of the play. Like people will say, oh, that's my actual family. This is not my family. That's their family. I have this connection that I'm part of them. I'm an alien or whatever. And you start realizing this thing may be all a stage play. And we all came in as, according to what's her name? Dolores Cannon, this 3-wave idea that consciousness has to raise at this time, and we all agree to come in to play a role. So the idea that
I've heard this,
you and I may have made an agreement before we were born. You say, oh, I'm gonna go write some books, and you're gonna do a podcast. I'm gonna come on your podcast, and we're all working together to do this thing. And that a lot of things that we think are random are not really random, and that's where you get the synchronicity thing.
Well, let me stop you right there, Grant, because that's a really interesting kind of segue. I wanted to, and you've probably seen this photo before, but I wanted to show you a photo because I wanted to get your opinion on this, and tell me what you see when you see this. This is very cool, Grant. I think you'll like this. Let me share the screen with you so you're able to see it. One moment. French, can you see that too?
Yeah, I can see it.
Okay, Grant, can you see that photo?
Yeah, I can't really see what it is though.
Can I zoom in a little bit for you? Can you see it better?
There you go.
Have you seen this
Oh,
photo before?
that's the Bigelow meeting at
Yeah. When you
Rockefeller Ranch. Yeah.
Yeah, when you see that, Grant, what does that say to you? I mean, there's a lot of people right there, right?
Well, that's basically Bigelow. I mean, everybody has Bigelow as a bad guy. I mean, Bigelow's initial thing to set up NIDS was to study. He was interested in UFOs and he was interested in life after death because his son committed suicide, and then the rumor was his grandson committed suicide, and then his
Wow.
wife died, and he's obsessed. Most people don't realize before that picture. Before he started NIDS, he put $3.7 million into the University of Nevada for a chair in consciousness study. They had a consciousness study segment at University of Las Vegas, Nevada. So he was, and I remember when there was a story that when he made the announcement at the first NIDS meeting that they were going to do UFOs and life after death, some guy was really skeptical, and he said, "Well, why don't we just do Sasquatch and ESP?" It's like insulted. I'm a scientist. You want me to do this garbage? So he was able to pick people's minds, and that's what you're doing. If you want to be a researcher, you do exactly what Bob Bigelow does. Is you find people that know what's going on. So he's gathering. He was paying, I heard, $3,000 a day as an honorarium. And so he had Kit Green, he had Hal Puthoff, he had the top people. You just pick these people and pick their brains and bring them in, and they would work on cattle mutilations and triangles and try to do it. So he had the money to do it. That's what you got to do. Is you got to go to the most important people. And that's what I did. Is I would spend my time. I was in my next book. I'm going to talk about the Avery. The Avery was a group of people that Bill Moore. A bunch of people came to Bill Moore from the government and said, we want to release this stuff. And so all these people, these names came out and said, people say, it's all garbage. They're not really. And I said, no, these people know what's going on. If you listen very carefully what Hal Puthoff. So anytime one of these guys does a lecture or gives a speech, I listen very carefully and I listen exactly what he's saying, because from time to time it will slip. The same as when Eric Davis said, they shut the program. Lazar's full of it. They shut the program down in 1989 and they can't figure it out. And when I go, holy cow, Eric Davis said that. And I know Eric Davis because Eric Davis can't lie. And he's the smartest guy in the room. There's no doubt. This guy is brilliant. And when he says that, then you go, that's the truth. If Eric Davis said that, then you pick up these things. So I watched the Avery and I said, I don't care if you believe in Ron Pandolfi or Richard Doty or Robert Collins or all these guys. If they say something, listen very carefully. These guys know a thing or two that you don't. And that's what Bob Bigelow is doing here, is he's gathering these people together, and Rockefeller is gathering all these people together, and he's trying to pick their brain because he's trying to figure it out. So people will go for UFO sightings, and I say, it's a total waste of time. It will tell you, yeah, something's going on, but you've got to either get an expert who's worked on it, or you got to talk to the experiencers and figure out. So that's why I went, when I saw it the second night, it was flying away from me, and I said, what's it doing? It's not doing anything. And then I wrote the book, and then I went to the local publisher, and it was a famous story here. And she said to me, Mr. Cameron, you may believe in this kind of stuff. Count me in among the unbelievers. I went, what? Are you kidding me? And so the book was gone, and I gave it to my sister. And 20 years later, she gave me the book back. She says, oh, you remember you gave me this thing? I go, I wrote a book. I didn't remember reading the book. But anyway, so what I did is I said, that's it. No more sightings. Sightings are stories you can tell your kids when you grow old and gray. They're not going to convince anybody. I can tell you what I saw and you go, well, that's kind of interesting. Any other sightings? It doesn't really matter. You got to figure out what's going on. I said, I saw that thing and I know it was real. I don't know what it is, but somebody's got to know what's going on here. That's why I went after the Canadian government, because I had the synchronicity. Again, synchronicity. My father was a pilot for the Canadian government, for the Department of Transport. Somebody in his office, a guy named Ernie Epp, was a radar tech. And radar, and said, Ernie Epp had a sighting. You want to talk to him? I said, yeah, okay, whatever. I go over and this guy's telling me this sighting, a UFO in the sky, whatever. And then the sighting's over, and he says, if you really want to know and just talk about synchronicity. He said, if you really want to know what's going on, you should see what the Canadian government was doing. I go, really? He said, yeah, I worked in the program. I said, you did? You did? And he said, yeah, there was only a couple of us. And he starts talking about Wilbur Smith. He was the smartest engineer he ever met. And the UFOs were landing in the backyard, and he was talking to aliens. And I go, what are you talking about? So I'm in this thing where I want to find out who knows what's going on. And suddenly this guy appears in my life, in my father's office, who tells me he worked on the program. There were six people who worked on the program. He just changed the tapes and they had these 5 instruments. They were at a flying saucer observatory. He would change the tapes, and he told me all these bizarre stories. And then I went and interviewed Wilbur Smith's wife. She was talking about AFA, the alien, and they were this and that, and they were going to land it on a base in Alberta, and they were talking to the prime minister, and I'm going, holy. And then that led to Eric Walker. And then Eric Walker told us all this stuff. So I'm looking for Eric Walker's file. And that led to the president. And I go, hey, the president's got to know what's going on. I'm at the Truman Library. And I said, hey, I'm looking for the Walker files. And they weren't really there. And then I said, hey, so what do you got on UFOs? And then they gave me like all the telegrams that came in, or the telegrams that came into the White House in the 52 shoot down, telling the president, don't shoot him down, Mr. President, don't shoot him down. And so I had all these telegrams. I said, that's it. That's all we got. I went to the Eisenhower Library down the road. And then I said to the guy, I said, I'm here to interview and you got to do an interview there to research. And he said, well, what do you want to research? I said, well, I want to know what the president's got on UFOs. And then they do the review before you go, and you go there and he's got 5 documents. And one was the CIA Robertson panel document, and five documents.
Well, that's Rockefeller, right? I mean, they're getting into Clinton.
No, this is Eisenhower. 50.
I'm sorry. Yeah.
I'm at the Eisenhower Library, and so the Robertson panel was the CIA report in 1952 where they come out and say,
yeah. My mistake. Robertson
debunk all this stuff. That document, it happened under the Truman administration, the last days of the Truman administration, but it ended up in the Eisenhower Library. So they got 5 documents. I go, that's all you got? 5 documents? I said, how many pages of documents have you got in the Eisenhower Library? And he said 28 million pages. And I go, something's wrong here. And that's when I started going, and I figured the president would be the answer. And the president wasn't the answer. It gave me some answers as to what was going on. But once I got that, then I had the download experience. That's when it started to fit together. It's like, you got to talk to the experiencers. These people are talking with the intelligence. And until you talk to people who are interacting with the intelligence, the rest of it's all a waste of time. These intelligences are telling these people, they're dropping little hints. So instead of listening to the president and the Avery and the Canadian government, I would listen to the experiencers, and they would tell me these bizarre synchronicity stories. Like, you flew in the craft. I remember Chris Bledsoe, and I'm talking to him, and I'm talking about this woman flying the craft. He said, well, I've flown the craft too. I said, you flew the craft too? He said, yeah, I flew. I said, stop, Chris. Don't tell me anything. I'm going to phone you on Skype. I'm going to tape it. I want you to start from the beginning and go to the end. And he was one of the ones that said that it was like 20 feet across, and he went inside. It was huge inside. And I said, you had that experience too? He said, yeah, it was huge. And he would tell me how he's inside. And he put a hand on the ball. He took his hand off. He could see where like a CD-ROM with the sort of the colors going through. You could see where his hand was. And then these hexagons on the wall start to spin, and they're getting bigger and bigger. And then he says, next thing you know, boom, the window opens up, and he says, I'm over the Cape Fear River where I was abducted. I'm sitting cross-legged on the floor, and I'm going, Yahoo! And he's flying down the Cape Fear River, this flying saucer. And those kind of stories. And if you look on the internet, there are really no stories of people flying the craft on the internet. Because I tried to find, there was none. All these people came to me. It was like one synchronicity, another person came. Suddenly I had 36 people who'd flown the craft.
And, then where do you want to see all this go then, Grant? I mean, you've done all this research over the next, let's just say 1 to 5 years. I don't want to say 20, 25. That's too far out. But 1 to 5 years, where do you want to see ufology? Where do you want all this to go?
It's going towards consciousness. So, I mean, when I started, I mean, there was no crop circles. There was no, I remember the light language people came forward. When my friend showed me this woman speaking light language, and she's going, and I'm going, what the heck is that? I'd never seen this before. And suddenly all these light language people are coming to me, and I'm talking to them, and I'm saying, do you know what you're talking? And then, and I had one panel, I had like 20 of them on there, and they're all, yeah, you do your light language, never do this light language. I'm going, this is absolutely bizarre. So the phenomena is changing as it goes along. But when we started, it was just simple. There was ground traces where they were burning the grass and leaving the tripod marks, and that doesn't happen anymore. And there was, there was no abductions. There was a lot of sightings and stuff like that. And so you see that this is progressing. They're moving us on this thing. And now the consciousness things start coming, especially when Lakatsky, the guy who ran the program, says this is the technology involves physical and psychic. It's a combination of the two. And when they were trying to, Corbell was trying to get him to talk about it. And he said, when they cried the crap, he said, I can't talk about that. I have to write it down and get approved. I gave you the answer. I'm not going any farther. And then he sort of gave this indication before Corbell cut him off. And he said, if you knew, he was indicating, if you knew what was inside the craft, the rest of the book would look primitive. And that's the whole thing. When you start to realize that the craft is huge on the inside, that there's this component, there's no time and space, then science moves along, and we advance, and we go to the next step, and then move it to the next step, and it gets more complex as you go along.
I mean, don't you wish sometimes, Grant, they just break the law and tell us though, right? And get the fun side of me, I because I want evidence. I want evidence any that I can get.
But that's an American mindset.
I guess, yeah.
We want everything. We want it yesterday. It's the idea that 100 years ago, that's what Walker said to us. You're just
Yeah.
curious. Admit it. You're just curious. Why should
Look,
we
I want to eat breakfast in France and then eat lunch in Japan. I want to go around. I want the tech like everybody else, Grant.
If there is, I mean, you can go to the other side of the universe. I mean, if this
That's
is where
true. Yeah, that's probably better.
The world starts to fall apart, and
Yeah.
that's where we're progressing. And
Yeah.
when you get Lukatsky saying that, and when the president, that's the first thing that's going to come out when that gets confirmed, that this is a reality, that there is this non-local component to this thing, and the craft can be bigger on the inside, and we can't back engineer this stuff, and it's way beyond us and stuff like that. That's why they're dropping the crafts. They want us to go.
Grant, I agree with you, though. I agree with you on this, though, that I think that this whole thing is way more complex than everybody thinks. I do. I think this is a big reason of why there's been such a reluctancy to put this out there. I mean, if you're talking about potentially, dealing with religions and finding out that maybe things aren't the way they are. I mean, try to go tell the Middle East, that they're not correct. Just tell me how that works out. It's not going to be good. And so I definitely agree with you on that. It's going to be more complex.
Yeah. But I think the people are going to be hurt the worst are the scientists who believe that it's all physical, and they're going to go like, I went to paid $45,000 a year to go to MIT, and it was all BS. Like, oh, come on. And those are people going to be offended. And the idea that why it's probably not being released is because they can't figure it out. And they know the Russians can't figure it out, the Chinese can't figure it out. And they figure if we can figure this out, that's why they went, and people will argue with me. I said, no, the reason they went to Skinwalker Ranch was not for UFOs. If you read Jacques Vallée's journal, you'll see at the end of 2006 when they bought, or 1996 when they bought Skinwalker Ranch, Jacques Vallée said, what are we doing here? There's no UFOs. We're wasting our time. What do you expect us to do here? There was no UFOs. What they looked at was Lukatsky. DIA was looking at technology. They wanted to put, how do you put 4 bulls inside a trailer that's locked? That's the slide 9. Putting stuff through metal, in moving people's minds. The woman comes into the house with the apport thing. I wrote the whole book on apports about, she comes in, she takes all the groceries out of the bag, goes to the next room, comes back in, and all the groceries are back in the bag again. And it's that kind of stuff. And so when Lukatsky goes there, and that's when you get to the phenomena is playing the game. The phenomena is the one disclosing. It's like when Jim Semivan was saying, John Alexander asked him, so who's running the show here? And he said, they're running the show. They actually told me, it's in the second book that's coming out. They actually told me, don't get so upset, Grant. You're getting all wound out of shape. Don't worry, they said. This is a quote. This is what they told me. We know how to land the plane. I knew exactly what they're rooking this thing. They're moving it towards an end conclusion. We know what we're doing. We know how to land the plane. Don't get all worried about this. And that's what you see. So when the Lukatsky goes, they were all reading the book, the Skinwalker book in the Middle East, all the military guys. And then he says, I'm going to go check this out because maybe we can get some technology out of this. We can figure out how all this paranormal stuff works. In fact, in the book, the Apport book, I quote a 1974 document from the DIA, 1974, that says, if we can figure out the Apport technology, we can actually go to the enemy, go into the vault, take the documents, bring them back to Washington, photocopy them, put them back, and they won't even know we were there. That's this idea of moving stuff through time and space. And so they that's why they went there. And when Lukatsky goes there, what happens? He gets in there, the 45-minute meeting, Bigelow's there, the ranch manager's there, Lukatsky's sitting there, and this symbol is sitting there from the Tubular Bells album cover. The Tubular Bells thing was the music to The Exorcist. And
oh, geez.
So this thing's floating there, and it's got this yellow stuff around. And when I saw it, when I heard that, I said, "Oh, you can almost see the alien saying, 'Welcome, Dr. Lukatsky. We thought you'd never show up.'" And so what they do, they put on a performance for him. They drag in the DIA. The DIA does this investigation. It raises the consciousness. It starts to leak out. Everybody realizes the DIA is doing this. The DIA is doing this. There's got to be something to it. Some scientists gets involved, and they have this performance. When they asked Bob Bigelow, Knapp in one of his interviews asked Bob Bigelow, so what was Skinwalker all about? What was it all about? And he says, without hesitation, he said, messaging. It's all about messaging and gaming. That's what he said. And that's what it is. It's all about messaging. They're playing this game. They're sending messages and they're doing this stuff. So that's why they went to Skinwalker Ranch. They're trying to figure out how all this paranormal stuff works. How does all this stuff? And
but what about Ben Rich then? I mean, do you think he just says ESP is the answer?
That's I know the quote. That's a troubling quote. I'm not sure what he meant by that. Or the one with the, we got stuff flooding in the desert.
Yeah.
They'll make George Lucas Jew.
Yeah,
But
do you think that's because they just couldn't get inside and he's just like, we know that there's some consciousness thing behind it, but we can't figure it out any further? I mean, is that what your take is on it?
Yeah, the Ben Rich thing is a puzzle. I mean, it comes from a reliable source, so I mean, he probably did say that. I mean, there are different types of UFOs. But if you take a look at Weiss, I mean, for example, Weiss, Lockheed Skunk Works, I mentioned this fact that he, John Podesta, had a disclosure meeting January the 25th, 2016, and Robert Weiss was in attendance on a UFO disclosure meeting, and he was running Lockheed Skunk Works. And then Tom DeLonge sends a message a week later. He said, "Oh, Robert Weiss has asked me if there's any updates that you have. You probably don't, but I could pass it along to him." So John Podesta always told the joke that when he was in the Clinton White House, he wanted to go to Area 51. He always had this joke that he was going to go to Area 51. So he's curious about what happened in Area 51. Now you have a UFO disclosure meeting, and the guy from Area 51 is asking him what's going on. So you get this whole thing. So to me, that's the Lockheed. They may have little bits and pieces that they figured out, but if you remember, and I have this all in this upcoming book, where Tom DeLonge, I tell the whole story about Tom DeLonge. Everything's Tom DeLonge figured this thing out. No, Tom DeLonge was given this by Lockheed Skunk Works, and they sent him to this agency, and then he went to NASA, and then he went.
Yeah,
to
I agree with you on that. I think that they did push him around.
They were feeding him all this stuff. They wanted him to put this kind of stuff out. But Tom DeLonge is talking to the general, and that's when they make the decision. They're in the skiff, and he says, show it to him. Show it. Okay, send him. Show him. And then he says, should we? And he said, yeah, take him. And then he has this comment, and the guy says, you may be disappointed. You may find, this is significant. He says, you may find a bunch of guys in the dark in suits standing around an elephant. And there again, it indicates they have no clue. Everybody
don't know.
Different. They're feeling around, and they're trying to figure this out. And so it may be that Lockheed wanted this thing into the white world because they can't figure it out. They want more minds in there because it's all stovepiped, and you've got a piece, and this guy's got a piece, and you don't know I've got the piece, and nobody's talking to each other. And that may be because I'm maintaining now, and a lot of people you'll see will be fighting me on Twitter. I'm saying that this is a planned disclosure, that Lockheed is behind this. They're pushing this thing out, and they're being painted as the bad guys. They're part of this thing because there's so many things about this whole thing that don't make any sense. It's like, well, what's going on here?
I mean, could they be pushing it out though? Because maybe they've gotten a little bit better understanding. Maybe they have cracked a little bit of the code, and they want to monetize it though. Grant, is that possible in your mind?
Well, they'll monetize it better if they've got more people and they get it. If they get the eminent domain clause, they're still going to have the material, and
but they have to break it to the public first. I mean, that this stuff is here.
Well,
they have to kind of sell them on that first, right?
But it's like any other, the F-35 technology. We've got it, and we're not telling you how it works or what we're working on. And you put all the patents in, and they still have control of it. It's not like because the government knows that Lockheed Skunk Works has got a craft doesn't mean the government's going to tell you what it is. They still got this whole thing because the things that don't make any sense. And I pushed this morning. I said this absolutely does not make any sense. You're painting Lockheed as the bad guys, and yet how the hell did Lockheed and Boeing and all these people get crafts? They were given it by the government. The government hired them. They contracted out for these people to do it.
Yeah, went and got the retrieved the craft that crashed, what have you, that came in, and then
the government has
control
of it, and they give it to them, and it makes sense. That's how industry works. These guys have technology, and they can't figure it out. So now you're sort of moving it back because the story they're telling is these, Sheehan's pushing this thing like these are an off the shelf, and they're the Illuminati, and they're uncontrolled and stuff like that. And then when you take a look at the document I leaked, the Wilson leak document, if you take a look at that guy and you see there again the significance where in the one page of the document it says, "Oh, we have a craft and we think it'll fly," and I go, "Oh, that story's true. They got a craft." And the thing is that everybody says, "Oh, it's disinformation. They're just throwing the guy off." And it's like, no, they've got a craft and they think it'll fly because they can't fly it. It needs a consciousness interface. You need someone to put their hand on the panel. So they've got an and when I saw that, I go, wow. And the same thing, they said no abductions. That UFOs are real, no abductions. And I fight with people on that one as well. The abduction, there's an event taking place, but it's not what people think it is. It's way more complex because nobody sees anybody being abducted. And then you have this non-local thing, no time and space.
Well, there's no video, of that. There's no, that thing that people are going to want, to be able to really, put a stamp on it for the majority of people. Yeah, I get that.
Yeah, people are just going to be interested in the abduction thing and the stories and stuff like that. But it's the oddities. It's like playing the chess game. When I see that, the craft. So I said this morning. I said, "What this? You think that they came 1,000 light years and then they forgot where they parked the flying saucer? This is like in a chess game. It's like, why the hell is he moving that piece? Like, well, this doesn't make any sense. And once you figure out why they're moving the piece, then you can play the game. But you do not move a piece in chess until you know what the guy's doing, because everybody's moving their own thing. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. You're not watching what the other guy's doing. And next thing you know, you're in a trap and he's got you and the game is over. Or you go like, why is he leaving his queen exposed? Like, I think I'll take his queen. And then 3 moves later, the game is over because you don't realize. And that's what this game is like. So there's these things like, how did they get the craft? Why are the aliens dropping pieces? Why are they dropping intact crafts and stuff like that? That has to be explained. And when you explain that, then you start to explain what may actually be going on, is that they are actually helping us. The same as Lakatsky, where they appear for Lakatsky and they do all this stuff for them, and they have all these different things with the hitchhiker, and they start to explore this. And then when Lakatsky comes out, he says it's got this psychic component. So now that's out. The intelligence wants that out. Then and Lakatsky's put that out. He's put out the fact that all UFO sightings are different, which is going to be very significant. People aren't talking about it yet, but that is extremely significant. If every UFO sighting is different, that completely changes the game.
Yeah, it's
And
interesting.
that's all it is. It's moving from one step to another, almost like David Bohm, the famous physicist, said at one point. He said, when you figure out all this quantum physics stuff, not really going to help because there's just another level below that. And people go, no. And that's true. It's going to get more complex and more complex and more complex. And
it could.
Yeah. That's what I think is we have no clue. That's what they told me in some of my psychedelic. I wrote up this stuff where the main message they had me was ego. They said, you think you know what's going on. You haven't got, and they used a swear word, you haven't got a clue.
Well, that pulls me into because Grant, we've been going for 2 hours, and I've loved every minute of it. I really appreciate you coming, man. This has been a blast. But I do want to. I could keep you for 4 hours. I feel like, but I don't want to do that to you. So here's what we'll do. I want to get your prediction and kind of taking everything full circle here. What do you think happens with this Schumer rounds amendment? Where do you see this thing panning out?
It's going through. They may not get the eminent domain, but as Sheehan said, you can drop that on them anytime you want. I mean, it's going through. And I think it's going to be revolutionary the minute the president goes to sign the bill, because right now they're playing this game. And I said to Steve Bassett, I can't believe they're doing this. I mean, you've got to take control of this. This is the biggest story of all time. So
we've got Bassett scheduled to come on next weekend, so we're really excited to talk to him too.
Yeah. Then you may actually have it. We actually have, like, for example, we have the situation. If you see on the interview I did with John Harbaugh, who's got the demonstration in front of Mike Turner's office this coming Friday and Saturday in Dayton. So you see these things are starting to move along, and the attention is there. Yeah, I think it's going to go through. It's going to move it another step. It's everybody's waiting. It's all going to get dropped. No, the government doesn't know. So you're going to find out, yeah, they know, and they can't figure it out. And then you're going to realize there's a psychic component. It's just going to unravel piece by piece by piece. That I say it's way less physical than people think it is. It's way more spiritual than people think it is. It's at least 1,000 times more complex than people think it is, and it will not have a hint of capitalism. Those are the 4 things I say that you're going to see, but it's going to unravel at a slow pace because the intelligence is running the show. It's like they said, we know how to land the plane. They're running the disclosure. None of this would have happened unless Bigelow had his experience, or this guy at Skinwalker Ranch had his experience, unless Jim Semivan had been experienced. You start realizing none of this would happen. Like the Lakatsky thing. If Lakatsky had not seen that object in the kitchen floating around, there would have been no OSAP, no ATIP, no New York Times article. There would have been no program. There would have been no disclosure. People don't realize there's these triggering events, and it's the phenomena that's behind these triggering events. That's why they take people. They want people to tell their stories. Or when Susie, no, what's her name? Sherry Wilde told the story where she's one of the big ones. There's another movie coming out where she's saying, I wake up in front of my computer and I'm looking at my computer and going, what the heck? I woke up in front of my computer. Why am I sleeping in front of my computer? And then she sees the word program's open. The word program is never open. Why is my word program open? And then she reads it and she goes, oh no, we're not going there. No, we're not going there. And then she hears and Da says, oh no, timing is everything. No, I'm not writing the book. And then she reads, that looks pretty good. And then Da says, we should do it. It's nope, I'm not writing your damn book. And then they force her to write the book. and then her daughters try to stop her, and that's what it is. So that you get these people are putting this stuff out, and it's piece by piece by piece, it gradually unfolds. And if life is eternal, if you have multiple lives, it goes on forever. 500 years from now, it's just going to be 10,000 times more complex, and we have all sorts of other things. And that's what, but the thing that moves us along is that curiosity thing. It's not the solving. Everybody thinks they've got it solved. We got the whole UFO thing solved, and we just need that one piece. The government admits that they're flying these crafts around. No, that's not what it is. There's no pieces, as Jimmy Semivan says. I'm not sure there's any dots. Or he said at one point, I don't think there's any, there does not appear to be any there. This is a guy that got the briefing. This is a guy who's a 2-star general in the CIA. This is a high-level guy who was behind the disclosure. And when he says, I don't think there's any there, and that I'll never see the end of it in my lifetime, then you realize this thing is very, very complex. And so it's this gradual thing. They move us piece by piece because they want us to figure it out. They're not here to do our homework. Or there was a channel thing with Martin Luther, the famous guy that started Protestant. Somebody was channeling him, and they asked him, why doesn't God why doesn't God present himself? And he said something to the effect that the not having it is what motivates the human mind. That's what makes you move.
Interesting.
The
That's
things
a good point.
And that we're here to be in the soil. We're here to figure these things out. It's all about experience. It's not about, because we have the American idea that we're going to get to the end of the road. But if so, you figure it out and you have it. Then 100 years ago, we were doing seances because we were bored and we wanted to have seances to talk to dead people. Now we're doing sky watches because we got 2 cars and we got the house and stuff like that. We're always on this thing. We want something at the end. But when you get to the end, then what do you do now? It's like, it's that thing that keeps me going and keeps everybody else going. It's something else. It's the next question. What's that? And it keeps you going. And that's what gets you curious. And that's what motivates science to move along. And it's, again, it's a closed loop system where we're feeding information into this system, this consciousness system, and it's getting more elaborate. And there's beings that are higher levels and they're moving down. And that's, I think, how it works. So we're just do our part. And it's not what you get out of it. It's what you're doing. What's your role? If you came into the world to do something, if it's a mission type thing, then you're going to ask, how did it work? All you got to do is figure out, what am I here to do? And am I doing it? And it really doesn't matter what the government's doing or whether Biden knows or what's going on. All this, my question is, why am I here and what am I supposed to be doing? And am I doing it? That's the end of story. Nothing else matters.
Very, very awesome, Grant, to have you on. Very interesting conversation, man. I can't thank you enough. Is there anything you want to plug before you go? I mean, I know you got, like I said, 15 plus books you're out there. You got a lot going on.
The Sky Pilot book, I think, is big because it's just been confirmed by Lakatsky, the guy that ran the program, who said the technology is physical and psychic combined. And that's what the Sky Pilot book is about. It's a physical craft, but it's alive, and you fly it with your mind. And you can go from here to the other side of the solar system instantaneously. No time and space. That changes everything. So that, and then I have these 2 books. I wrote the book called Managing Magic, which is what I say they're doing.
That was a very cool book, by the way. Very cool book.
They're not doing UFOs. They're doing magic. So I knew this right back in 2006. And I wrote that book in 2017. I said in that book, which is February of 2017, that the big man, who was Jim Semivan, I was told by Chris Bledsoe back in 2015, the big man says high-level officials are going to come forward and they're going to say UFOs exist and they're going to force disclosure. That's in that book, February of 2017. Exactly what's happened now. And what I'm saying now is I'm going to go through the whole Tom DeLonge thing about how this is all unraveled now and what Lakatsky has revealed in Beyond Managing Magic, and then a 3rd book, Beyond Managing Magic, Landing the Plane, which is the end. That this phenomena is them. They're running the show. They're unraveling this thing. They're releasing this stuff. We're just following the breadcrumbs. That's all we're doing.
Yeah, if you have my opinion on it, ufology's been on the penalty kill a long time, Grant. I hope we get on the power play at some point. You know what I mean? We got to get the man advantage. So no doubt about it. Hey, like I said, I can't thank you enough for coming. This has been a tremendous episode for us, and we really want to thank you for being here. I hope you have a really great rest of your weekend. Obviously, follow Grant on Twitter. Very, very cool things. You got a YouTube channel as well. That's the White House UFO. I got that linked in the description, so that's there if you want to follow along. That's it.
Yeah, Twitter's the one they should watch right now because I'm posting a lot of stuff on Twitter. I'm starting to push what people are missing on this disclosure thing, based upon the experience of knowing how this thing unraveled. and the fact that Lockheed may be involved in this, which nobody's saying. Everybody just thinks that, there's bad guys and we've uncovered them and we're going to expose them and we're going to throw them in jail and all the answers are coming. And I'm saying, no, there's other parts of history that you got to look at. That's what I put out. So these 2 new books on Beyond Managing Magic and then Beyond Managing Magic, Landing the Plane, which is the final one. And hopefully I can get out of the disclosure stuff and get back to consciousness, because consciousness is where it's at. It's as Deepak Chopra says, everything is an activity inside consciousness. I absolutely guarantee you that's what I was told, and a lot of people have been told that, and that's the way it works. And eventually we're all going to realize that it's not a physical world. It's a world made out of consciousness, and it's all about experience, and it's about what you do and enjoy it and learn and put back into the system, and the system gets more elaborate. Or as someone said, the universe is not more magnificent than you think. It's more magnificent than you could ever imagine.
And we got a front row seat, Grant, don't we?
You got it. That's what I said. You heard my line about the Super Bowl. People, the average Super Bowl ticket is $10,000. And people, hey, look, I went to the Super Bowl. Look at my tag to the Super Bowl. Not only have we got the Super Bowl, we are in the building. We know most of them don't even know there's a Super Bowl going on. We're not only in the building, we're playing in the game. And you got to realize that you are playing in the Super Bowl of all stories, and you got to play. You could have been an untouchable in the streets of Calcutta and live your days in a junkyard looking for something valuable enough to sell for food for tomorrow.
I mean, it's true.
You got to play in the Super Bowl.
That's true. Yeah.
The fact that you're in it and do what you can to move the ball down the field. And it doesn't matter when we score the game. You're in the game. Enjoy the game and do what you can. Do whatever job you assigned yourself to do when you came in here.
Absolutely. Well, stay warm up there in Winnipeg. All right.
Yeah, Grant, it's been a pleasure listening to you.
Warming. It's warmer. There hasn't been a cold year here. 1 year in 12 years. It's actually very warm. It's the coldest major city in the world, and it's actually fairly warm.
All right. Well, Grant, thank you. Have a great wonderful rest of your weekend, and have a great holiday. Hope you and your family have a great one. All right.
Yeah. Thanks for putting up with my stories.
Oh, you're great, Grant. Have a great rest of your weekend. See you later, everybody. Thank you for coming to Terrestrial Material, guys. We'll catch you next time.
Bye-bye.